With a jubilant cry full of joy, the protagonist burst into the room, loudly declaring that the long-awaited alchemist had finally arrived. His words were lost in the unexpected silence. The people present exchanged glances, but no one uttered a single sound. The boy looked around, noticing the general despondency of those gathered. It seemed to him that he was the only one who felt such a strong uplift of spirit at that moment. Suddenly, there was a sharp gnashing of teeth, and a voice full of hidden rage asked if it was really an alchemist standing before him. The man explained that he was Urine Mercadel, the heir of the house. He bombarded the boy with questions about what class he had chosen. The crowd watching the scene unfold began to whisper, actively discussing the obvious, that the boy really was an alchemist. Among them, there were anxious cries, foreshadowing the imminent end of the Mercadel house. The hero seemed completely unperturbed. He objected to his father, saying that he was wrong, because the alchemist is the class with the most exciting and unusual leveling system. He confidently claimed that his stats would surpass those of even a swordmaster or a master. In response, his father's angry cry was heard, categorically denying the existence of interesting pumping and demanding that he stop making excuses. He waved his hand in annoyance, insisting that an alchemist was a completely useless class to take part in combat, a truth that was obvious even to a baby. The rest of the people present remained deathly silent, avoiding to interfere. Yurin, meanwhile, noted with a slight grin that he had known about this since infancy, especially about the uselessness of alchemists. After all, as he put it, he had played this game more than once. A smug smile never left the boy's face. One of the people present quietly asked what this game was that they were talking about. The man clicked his tongue in irritation, waving away the question. He explained that his son had been saying strange things ever since he became self-aware. Although no one believes it, the results nevertheless confirm his words. Then he seems to ask if he himself is sure, if there is not some mistake, and then immediately falls silent, as if cut off. The guy, as if wanting to change the subject, calmly noted that Yurin, unfortunately, was only 15 years old. He placed his hand on the ancient stone tablet, and at that moment his status was displayed. The status ritual was completed without error. The protagonist reminded those present that status is not a random gift, but a blessing from God, who rules this world. It is formed under the influence of a person's character, education, life path, and also, the family lineage also plays a role. Thus, the man could not be to blame for the status he received. The man raised his eyebrows meaningfully, preparing to get to the main point. He continued, explaining that sometimes, although extremely rare, things can happen. The status can also reflect a strong, sincere desire of the person himself. He glanced at Urine, who remained completely unperturbed and unimpressed. Suddenly, the father, unable to contain his rage, attacked his son with his fists. The shockwave from his attack was so powerful that the floor in the room began to shake noticeably. The man said that he was subconsciously showing fatherly concern. A grin flashed across the hero's face. He watched his father calmly. The attack was powerful, leaving a hole in the floor. The guy noted with satisfaction that this is exactly what he felt. Suddenly, a young man from the crowd loudly asked for attention. He raised his hand, declaring that he too needed to undergo the rite of passage. The father spoke the name of Imavnor. The man pointed at his son and noted bitterly that the Mercadel household also had an Imavnor. He reminded them that he was born from a concubine. Compared to his brother, he was always weaker in both his studies and martial arts. The protagonist felt the atmosphere change. The man glanced at his son from the crowd, confirming that their blood relationship was beyond doubt. The man in the cloak, responsible for the ceremony, asked the boy to place his hand on the stone table. The whole crowd waited for the results. The father muttered that all his hope was now pinned on this son. The protagonist yawned. A cry of congratulations was heard. Imavnor was overjoyed, because his status was that of a swordmaster. Tears of joy glistened in the boy's eyes from this stunning news. The man froze for a moment, clearly taken aback by this turn of events, but then a wide smile lit up his face. He loudly praised the boy, declaring that this was exactly what he expected from his son. The crowd burst into applause, Imavnor turned to Urine, then burst into jubilant laughter. Now, he believed, it would be obvious to everyone which of the brothers was truly the better one. The boy promised to prove his superiority. The protagonist just stood silently to the side. He thought about how being a swordmaster meant belonging to a powerful class, and with diligence one could achieve impressive strength. The guy, enlightened by a thought, grabbed Imavnor by the chest. He expressed his gratitude to his brother. Yurin, not holding back his enthusiasm, loudly announced that they needed to have a training session tomorrow. However, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by a loud shout from his father. He declared that he had made his final decision. The man explained that from now on, Imavnor would be the head of the family and the heir of the Mercadal house. Moreover, he ordered that it be announced that he was the true son of his legal wife. The boy's face brightened, and his gratitude to his father was heard. Meanwhile, the protagonist remained completely unperturbed, but then he felt fingers pointed at him. His father addressed him. He loudly declared that he was no longer a member of this family, and the alchemist's departure from the Mercadal house would be an indelible shame. The man shouted angrily, pointing his finger at his son, and demanded that he leave the house immediately. The protagonist froze, shocked by these words. The next moment, he was suddenly thrown out of the house, and Urine tumbled head over heels down all the steps. The father continued his angry speech, adding that outside this house, the former son could no longer call himself Mercadal. He asked if everything was clear to him. The boy just scratched his head, asking if his father really hated alchemists. After all, everything was starting to get interesting now, but he was asked to disappear. Then the main character noticed his maid through the half-closed doors. It was a housemaid who was watching the young man closely. The boy noted that it was a housemaid named Rotten, but the girl's face showed obvious contempt. She narrowed her eyes and clicked her tongue dismissively. At that very second, the door slammed behind the guy. After walking some distance from the house, the boy realized that even Rotten had turned her back on him, and he literally had nowhere to go. The boy spread his arms to the sky and shouted loudly and jubilantly that now he was finally completely free. He decided to immediately open his status and carefully examine his characteristics. His status showed the class Alchemist and the first level. The rest of the skills were also at the initial stage of development. He understood everything. Now he would be able to approach the matter much more seriously. Although he had planned to stay home longer, he looked at his characteristics, remembering the status ritual he had performed. The guy burst out laughing, noting to himself that now everything was exactly like in the game. Before being born into this world, the main character was completely absorbed in the virtual world of a game called Fantasy Story. He recalled its rules, choosing a class, slaying monsters, mastering skills, and strategically battling powerful monsters. He mastered every class available in the game, but strangely enough, no matter the path he chose, the outcome was always predictable. As his power grew, the process turned into a tedious routine. Among all the classes, the alchemist was his absolute favorite. Moving through the area, the protagonist mentally noted his luck, because he managed to take with him a minimum set of tools and money, and most importantly, a little ore. These were the 10 cursed ores that he had managed to hide thanks to his father's connections. He had only one skill at his disposal, the processing skill. Having spread the ore on the stump, he felt that the time had come to act. He began to transmute the stones. Suddenly, Urine loudly exclaimed that everything was finally ready. The protagonist, smiling, noted that all preparations were complete, and he was ready to begin implementing his plans. He intended to enjoy the game using the strategy he had developed for this class, and items, even under the maximum restrictions of this world. Looking at the shining sun, he spread his arms wide, and a feeling of happiness came over him. After a while, the smoke gradually cleared over the forest, indicating that work was in full swing. There were several impressive piles of stones lying in the forest. Urine dealt with the small goblins, who screamed and squealed loudly from his blows. Having defeated another enemy, the protagonist wiped the sweat from his forehead and wondered if it was time to stop. The defeated bodies of his enemies lay around him. He sat down on a tree stump and looked around. He noticed that the demons were weak, and since he had started exterminating them, there had been no difficulties. He asked the system to open his status. To his delight, skill points finally appeared. However, he noticed that the level, as expected, remained unchanged. 1. He remembered that this was due to the cursed ring that forced the level to 1. It was his favorite item from the game. The young man turned the jewelry on his wrist. The protagonist twisted the ring in his hands, and then put it on again, noting the changes in his characteristics window. He continued to study the data and confirmed that while the ring was equipped, the experience continued to accumulate, which was consistent with the mechanics. He also thought that the greater the level difference with the enemy, the more experience and power he could gain. He decided to use 1 unit of strength to gain 1 skill experience point. A small demon lay exhausted nearby. The protagonist loudly exclaimed that everything was going exactly according to plan. Meanwhile, Urine was getting flamestone from the cliff and collecting hard berries in the forest. Suddenly, something caught his attention, but he immediately decided that he had imagined it. Finally, he began to process the food and noted with satisfaction that the grenade was ready. It was his main weapon, and he examined it carefully. He had made it himself from scrap materials. In the dark forest, on the edge, a rabbit was hiding. It was a horned killer, whose level was 12. The monster, similar to a rabbit with horns, was known for its aggressiveness. The protagonist threw a grenade straight at the enemy. There was a deafening roar that knocked the little beast down, and it exploded. Coming out from behind the bushes, it cheered loudly, celebrating its victory. He explained that this was already the second monster, as it heard the noise from afar and instinctively threw a grenade. Turning around, he suddenly saw his maid, but the grenade had already left his hand and was flying quickly straight towards her. The girl screamed loudly in horror, and the guy didn't even have time to come to his senses. Rotten's squeal echoed throughout the area. She clearly didn't understand what he was doing. The protagonist scratched his head. The girl asked how he could almost kill the one who had served him for so long. She brought a handkerchief to her eyes. Through her sobs, she reproachfully said that he was a real sinner. Yurin hastened to explain that he had not removed the pin from the grenade, and therefore no explosion could have occurred. However, this explanation did not calm the girl down. The main character only internally lamented that his victim was only rotten. Yurin turned to her with a smug grin, asking if she had come for him, thinking that his father might have asked her to bring him home. The maid sat down on a nearby tree stump, shaking her head. She muttered something about how she thought men would never say things like that. The protagonist noted that she had toxic behavior. The maid shook her head, explaining that she no longer served in their household. Her plan had been to live a quiet life, gaining Yurin's favor. However, she now realized that this had been a grave mistake. The boy shuddered. The protagonist involuntarily remembered his brother and then asked what happened to Amavnor. The girl answered that physiologically she could not fulfill his request. The guy only briefly noted that this was very harsh. Rotten hoped to follow him into town, but instead she got lost. Confused, she asked him if he was going to become a robber. The protagonist thought that the maid did not know how to navigate the area. He explained to her that from the moment he was born, he was destined to be only an alchemist. Rotten asked what he was doing. In response, the guy explained that it was the so-called limited game. The girl only became more confused, listening to his words. At that moment, a formidable opponent appeared before them. Bear Armor, a monster of level 32. It was a huge bear with skin as hard as a shell and terrifyingly long claws designed for deadly attacks. Rotten realized that the alchemist level was 1, and the boy was about to engage in battle with the monster. Urine asked why she continued to follow him. The girl whispered that limited play was death, but he only asked her to leave. The maid objected, saying that she would not help. In response, the guy snapped that he was not asking her about it. By this time, he had already exterminated several dozen horned killers, accumulating 28 skill points and receiving the first level of the aiming skill. The boy concentrated, took a deep breath, filling his lungs with air. Exhaling sharply, he muttered that everything was finally ready. He internally declared that the game was about to begin and quickly jumped out from behind the bushes, right towards his opponent. Urine appeared right in front of Bear Armor, catching the monster off guard. He deftly aimed his weapon, casting all the necessary spells in an instant and activating it. In response, the bear let out a deafening roar. The boy, although he retreated a little back when he saw the attacking bear, still did not stop his attack. The girl, hiding behind the bushes, cried out in despair that what was happening was pure madness. The enemy was rushing straight at the guy, crushing all obstacles in its path. The bear was already very close to Urine, but he mentally said no, because this was the most important part of his limited game. He carefully watched the enemy. Urine knew that this was the result of his careful preparation. He used shovels to dig a deep trap. Urine spread his arms as his opponent fell with a deafening crash into the hidden trap he had prepared. He burst out laughing, admiring himself. The bear whined, trying to get out of the trap, but all his attempts were in vain. Urine spread his arms wide, releasing a whole stream of grenades. There were as many as 7 shots in a row. A multitude of explosive devices rushed towards the enemy. Soon, a series of deafening volleys was heard, which shook the entire area. The hero asked whether the beast was dead or still alive. However, the only answer was a loud roar. The bear, unfortunately, was still alive. The beast continued to roar loudly and desperately tried to escape from its trap. But the protagonist only laughed in response. He laughed so loudly and uncontrollably that he could not stop. Rotten, watching what was happening from behind the bushes, did not know what to say. The young man noted that there was a monster in front of him which, as he understood, could not be killed with either a knife or a grenade. This news, according to him, only made him laugh harder. He explained that it was at this moment that he found everything that was happening funny. He then reached out to the materials lying nearby. He began to process them. Using his skill aiming level 1, he decided to increase his accuracy. With attack level 1 and the bear's tough hide, he knew he had to hit its weak point. A bow and a sharp arrow soon appeared in the boy's hands. He pulled the bowstring back and a smile appeared on his face. Because, as he knew, if he failed, he would die. It was pure excitement. Pure excitement. He shot an arrow straight into his opponent's eye. The beast immediately screamed in pain. The protagonist noted that this gave him great pleasure. From the moment he began to act, the young man's face lit up with a smile. He stated that his brain never ceases to experience delight, and that he lives for such moments. The wounded beast was still in front of him. Its paws were desperately trying to get out of the trap. The bear was growling, trying to attack its opponent. The protagonist stretched out his hand and threw a grenade right in front of its muzzle. He ordered it to eat. The grenade was fired straight from his hands and headed into the enemy's mouth. It exploded on impact, tearing the bear to pieces. Urine received a notification about gaining experience. His level had been raised, but due to the effect of the cursed ring, he remained fixed at level 1. A tall column of smoke rose from the battle site. Urine froze, thinking about the fact that he had received 27 SP from the bear. This meant that without the cursed ring, he would have risen to 28 SP. He looked ahead and noted that it would be a shame to leave his prey right there. The bear lay in ambush, completely motionless. The protagonist spent 25 SP and received Inventory level 1. He spent the remaining points on Alchemy level 1. The protagonist built his inventory, which resembled a portal, and was happy that his defeated opponent fit into it. He listed everything he had received. He noted that the item was incredibly convenient. Rotten watched from afar and admitted that she had not expected him to survive. Meanwhile, the guy was preparing his trophies for transfer. He didn't understand what the girl was talking about, but she explained that it wasn't schizophrenia. She admitted that she thought all this talk about the game was a way to escape reality. But, frankly, in a way, she even said that he was stronger than the ballmaster. The guy was taken aback by this news and froze in place. His eyes widened and he didn't know what to say. He got goosebumps all over and asked if she was trying to please him. The girl just clicked her tongue, and the guy noticed it. She asked him not to worry about her, as she would be heading to the city from now on. She realized that even an alchemist had potential. However, staying with him would mean dying prematurely. She looked at the battlefield behind Urine. Rotten asked how he could possibly get aroused by such a situation, adding that limited play was something for truly strange people. The young man, holding his fallen prey, did not know what to answer her. As she walked away from Urine, the girl, Rotten, turned around and remarked that if a first-level alchemist could defeat such a powerful bear, then he should definitely register with the guild, as it would bring him a lot of benefits. Urine scratched the back of his head and tried to find out where she was heading, but there was no answer. At that moment, he suddenly realized that the girl seemed to be genuinely concerned about him. He couldn't deny this feeling, because perhaps this was the first time she truly began to understand him. He thanked Rotten, calling loudly after her. The girl turned around again, gave him a fleeting sad glance, and turned away again. She went deeper into the forest, saying only a short farewell. Urine was left alone in the forest, lost in thought about her words regarding the guild. He admitted that there was truth in them. In order to avoid sleeping in the open, he needed to secure shelter and a means of subsistence. Unlike the game worlds he was used to, here you had to earn a living. At that moment, his stomach growled loudly. Urine decided that he would deal with all these difficulties gradually. Life was more tiring than he imagined. Not far from the place where the fallen goblins lay, the legs of an unknown creature appeared. It had small ears, and its body resembled the figure of a beautiful beauty who carefully looked around, carefully examining herself. The cursed ring, described as an item that fixed Freya's level at level 1. It could be obtained by crafting a cursed stone. It seemed useless, but the protagonist found a use for it, using it as a valuable tool. He called it, quote, game limitation. He began his activity with a battle against a small creature, which he skillfully blew up with his mines. It was a level 5 foul-smelling monster that resembled a marten. It emitted a foul odor and tried to run away if the enemy approached. Yurin, crouching down, noticed that monsters usually did not retreat from those who were the same level as them. Using the treatment, he managed to obtain a bag and some stinking liquid. The smell was so terrible that the young man screamed loudly in disgust. At that moment, he was deep in the forest, not far from the mountains. He came to the conclusion that spending the night on the first level would be a foolish idea, but also decided that leaving the forest was a waste of time. So he decided to stay put. He used the foul-smelling liquid to mark the territory. Then he turned around and his stomach growled even louder. The young man looked around and realized that he was very hungry. First, Urine carefully skinned the creature, then gathered logs, found hot and flat stones, got the salt he had brought from home, and processed fresh herbs. The result was a steak from the stinking creature. The protagonist greedily devoured a piece of meat, noting that it was incredibly tasty, and his eyes reportedly sparkled with pleasure. It was a simple meal, but the meat was juicy and melted in his mouth. He remembered Japanese food. He missed it. The night passed, and the young man woke up. He immediately felt that his joints were in great pain and noted that he should have prepared better for the night. Urine admitted his inexperience. He noticed the compost left by the animals. What he saw made him very happy. He poked at them with a stick and assumed that, in all likelihood, these were the tracks of a predator. Not far away, he also saw clear claw marks. He decided that all the signs matched, and it was time for him to prepare for the meeting. Soon he noticed a level 65 wolf ahead. The beast had huge claws. The wolf tore apart enemies, using its sense of smell to determine their location. The guy sprayed a foul-smelling liquid, and the beast came running. Urine watched everything from the bushes. The young man then fired his weapon at the enemy and noted that the situation was going well, and that the wolf, in his opinion, was easier to deal with since it had no arms. The monster let out a piercing scream. Its eye was injured, but it continued to navigate by smell and seemed to foresee something ahead. The monster looked straight ahead, but did not see anything that was happening around it. The wolf began to look around, trying to spot the enemy. The young man hid in the bushes and realized that the wolf's nose was blocked by the stinking liquid, and he could not assess the situation. Suddenly, a hissing sound was heard. The wolf rushed straight at the protagonist and furiously ruffled his bushes. The protagonist smiled, admitting that it seemed he had given away his location to the enemy. Urine extended his hand, but the enemy, taking advantage of the most inopportune moment, attacked with his claws. The wolf continued to pursue him, knowing exactly where he was. The hero continued to run away from him, noting with concern that he now had no chance to attack. He ran forward along a trampled path in the forest. He thought that was why the game limitation was so exciting. He jumped sharply right under the cliff. The wolf fell down with the hero, but Urine, quickly assessing the situation, used the rope he had secured some time ago. The protagonist calmly landed near the cliff, clinging to the rope. He was happy with his victory and the fact that the wolf had essentially trapped itself. The young man paused on the rope and looked down at the unfortunate creature, who, dangling below, looked completely bewildered by his position and what was happening at the bottom of the abyss. After descending from the cliff, Yurin quickly ran up to the fallen wolf. To his surprise, he discovered that the monster's status had still not been updated. The protagonist pulled out his dagger from his cloak, intending to finish what he had started. Soon after, the long-awaited status window popped up in front of him, and he was pleasantly surprised to see how many points he had managed to accumulate. Resting after the intense battle, Urine reflected on his recent victories. He calculated that he had successfully defeated more than 20 stinking creatures and ferocious wolves with large claws, which confirmed that his strategy was correct and everything was going according to plan. His arsenal of knife, rocket stone, and inventory contents now worked as one, and to that he added his newly acquired skill of quickly switching items. As he waved the sheet in his hand, he mentally noted that true strength lies in speed. He was pleased to find that his processing and mixing skills had improved from level 1 to level 4. The hero fell to the ground and burst into laughter, admitting that this was incredibly exciting. His heart was pounding. He had not yet decided who to choose as his next target. What weapon would be most effective? He settled down comfortably, enjoying the warmth of the sun's rays. However, he soon jumped up, realizing that time was running out. He realized that he had to continue the struggle for survival, which was taking all his strength. In order to defeat even more powerful monsters, he needed careful preparation, including gathering materials. Urine moved along the path. Soon he noticed a level 10 poison frog, known for its dangerous poison. Urine looked at her intently, and a slight smile appeared on his face. He internally decided that this poison would be his next desired target. Armed with a bow and arrows, Urine unleashed a hail of arrows towards the poisonous frogs. Many of the creatures fell under his onslaught. He knew that despite their low level, these creatures should not be underestimated. After all, their poison could be fatal. Therefore, he preferred to attack from afar, aiming at their vulnerable points. The young man pulled the bowstring again, preparing the next arrow. Then, activating the inventory, he quickly put the defeated creatures there. At that moment, his gaze fell on another frog, hiding on a tree branch. Pointing an arrow at it, Urine loudly exclaimed that he had found another one. But suddenly the boy stumbled and fell. The bow slipped from his hands at the most inopportune moment, and the arrow missed the target. The frog, taking advantage of the moment, jumped up. Urine screamed, sensing trouble. The beast jumped straight at him, oozing a dangerous liquid. The hero froze, overcome with fear. He instantly pulled out his dagger, and at the last second, just before the collision, cut the frog into pieces. The young man looked at his fallen opponent, gasping for breath. His hand was covered in poisonous slime. The guy couldn't catch his breath, realizing that he had made a serious mistake. Without immediate treatment, he knew he would die within a few hours. His arm was in jeopardy. He wondered if there would be an antidote in the nearest village, but immediately realized that he would not have time to get there. He should have stocked up on them in advance, or at least bought them along the way. However, he noted that this was also part of the game's restrictions. Overcoming the pain, Urine continued on his way, clutching his injured arm. Soon, he noticed an attractive cave ahead. Entering, he wondered if there were herbs for an antidote. But the cave was occupied. In front of him lay a level 142 silver fox. It was a creature with silver fur, known for its ability to understand human speech. Urine noticed that the fox was wounded and had bloody marks on its back. He assumed that it had been injured by another monster, probably in a fight over territory. The fox sniffed, fixing her sharp eyes on him. At that moment, the hero had an idea. He approached the fox with a proposal to make a deal. Asking if she was resistant to poison, he showed her his swollen, fluid-darkened hand. Urine promised to heal her wounds in exchange for help with his own poisoning. The fox didn't show much enthusiasm, but Urine continued to gesture. He said that her silence would mean consent. First, he needed an advanced restorative elixir. The hero created it with his magic and handed it to the beast. After some time, the fox was completely healed, its fur glowing with a soft light. Now, he said, it was the fox's turn to help him. She just had to wait a little, and everything would be fine. He held a small syringe in his hands. Urine explained that he would inject the fox with a small amount of frog poison. It would hurt a little, but she would have to endure it for a couple of hours. After that, he would take her blood. Using the mixing skill, he can create an antidote. Once the antidote was ready, he would be able to recover. Meanwhile, his hand had visibly swollen and turned a dark shade, Suddenly, the hero hesitated, stopping. He was overcome by thoughts of what would happen if the plan did not work. Looking out of the cave, he noticed that it would soon be dark, and he would need to make a fire. The young man lay down on the hard stone floor of the cave, lost in thought about the future. The fox watched him from the side, and then, after a while, rose to his paws. He came up and sniffed the sleeping man. Then the fox opened its mouth above his head. At that moment, Urine realized that his confidence in the similarity of what was happening to the game was a fatal mistake. In the game, you didn't have to worry about overexertion or the limits of your abilities. It was convenient. However, the reality turned out to be completely different. The young man noted to himself how inconvenient and troublesome everything was in this world. He also felt very hungry. In his opinion, the game was much better. Suddenly he was called out, calling for him to wake up. The hero felt himself soaked with sweat. He opened his eyes wide, full of horror. He looked around for a while, trying to comprehend what was happening. He found himself lying on a girl's lap. She asked him softly if he was finally awake. The girl said that all this time while he was sleeping, she was waiting and she was terribly bored. This news shocked the guy. The main character was shocked to see a naked girl nearby. She admitted that she almost died of boredom. The guy was shocked and did not understand who was in front of him. The girl noted that such behavior on his part was very rude. She reminded him that they had spent the night together, but the young man did not remember it. Moving away, he loudly asked who she was. The girl smiled and reminded him that she was the same fox that had saved him yesterday. Now he began to understand the situation. The boy froze, unable to find words to respond. He looked at her with disbelief, wondering if it had ever happened that a monster turned into a human. It seemed like something random had happened in the game, although he didn't remember it for sure. The girl extended her hand and said that they needed to sort out the situation quickly. Taking his palm in hers, she examined it carefully. Suddenly, she loudly exclaimed that this was not it, and hit the guy. She put her hand to her chest and explained that she needed a contract. She explained that she wanted to make a contract with him so that they could fight together. Her eyes were burning with fire. The young man was taken aback by this news and thought about it. Urine clapped his hands and shouted loudly. The girl decided that the contract had already been concluded. She bequeathed something important and said that this was not just a frightening sound. Meanwhile, the guy ran out of the cave screaming, not understanding what was happening. If he signed the contract, his entire solo game would go down the drain. He ran quickly and awkwardly, sometimes stumbling and falling into the bushes. After a while, crawling out of the bushes, he noted that he felt out of shape. If he continued hunting in this state, he would die. While he was in shock, a voice was heard from behind asking where he was. The frightened boy realized that he would have to retreat for a while. He saw a cart ahead and asked to stop. After some time, Urine found himself in the city and scratched his head, watching what was happening around him. He was in the guild and wondered if he really wanted to do this. There were many adventurers inside the guild, doing their own quests. A girl stood in front of him and asked how she could help. Approaching the construction site, the guy expressed a desire to register as an adventurer. The girl understood him and asked him to fill in the necessary information right there. The young man sat down and thought that he really should have registered with the guild before the hunt. However, for some reason, he didn't want to do that. The girl asked him to wait a little. She handed him a guild card that was glowing with a bright light. The protagonist was very surprised by this. She asked if he wanted to know more about the map, and he agreed. The map showed the character's level. Depending on the level, the rank changed. From 1 to 9 rank F, from 10 to 49 rank E, and so on. When the level increased, the map was updated and you had to go to the stand to update it. She gave a lot of information, but the guy said that it didn't matter to him because he was always level 1. He thought it was a waste of time and missed the skip function. He asked where he could exchange monsters. The girl noted that this could be done right here. Urine was inspired and asked to take care of this. He laid out a huge bear and many small predators on the table. Everyone present, including the girl, screamed loudly at what they saw. She was shocked that the guy was only level 1 and asked how that could be. He hesitated and realized that he might have forgotten about it himself. His face changed abruptly. He started gesturing and explaining that the monster was already wounded. The guy explained that he didn't kill the monster but simply used the inventory skill that he had from the very beginning. This is understandable. The girl looked at him suspiciously, But after a while she understood the situation. She was worried, because his class was an alchemist and he was not very strong in combat. However, the presence of an inventory gave hope for the successful formation of a team. She handed the young man a bag of coins. The protagonist happily left the room, thinking that exchanging monsters turned out to be much more profitable than earning money on quests. Suddenly, he hit the opening door and screamed. A man in armor entered the guild, apologizing for the collision and asking if the newcomer was okay. The warrior leaned over the boy and asked if he was new here. Hearing an affirmative answer, the man was surprised that he had not seen him before and asked what class he was. Yurin called himself an alchemist, and he made a puzzled expression. He noted that it was a craft profession. He did not advise staying with such a class and advised to do something more combative. The hero felt irritated by the giant's tone, but after looking closely, he realized that he really looked strong. Through clenched teeth, he announced his refusal of adventure. The warrior nodded, said that he understood everything, apologized for the interference, and was clearly embarrassed. The guy did not take offense, and decided to simply ignore the old man. Leaving the guild with a bag of gold in his hands, the young man was happy, and thought that it was time to choose an inn and buy the necessary things. When everything was ready, Urine planned to return to the forest. He was pleased with the cheerful restrictions of the game. However, after some time, the hero discovered that the bag was empty. He was upset. The costs were higher than expected. Had to go back to the guild for more help. The young man, clearly in need of funds, dumped the impressive carcass of a huge wolf on the guild table, asking to purchase it. The receptionist exclaimed in surprise, trying to understand what was happening. She was amazed that this newbie, who had only recently received the status of an adventurer, could bring a monster of level 60 or higher. In her opinion, it was simply impossible. The hero himself did not seem to understand the essence of her amazement. At that moment, a knight entered the room, greeting the young man and noting that they had already met the other day. The guy cursed inwardly at the sight of him. The man came closer, wondering what kind of loot was lying on the counter. He reminded him that he had already warned that an alchemist was not a suitable class for an adventurer. The hero felt very irritated. However, the knight's attention was suddenly drawn to the huge carcass of the wolf. He stopped abruptly, peered, and asked if this was by any chance the same big claw wolf. The young man lowered his head, confirming his guess. The man scratched his beard, saying that now everything was clear to him. The girl added that this was indeed the young man's prey, to which the knight's face changed in sincere surprise. He stated that if it was such a monster, the hero could not defeat it alone. The knight asked who the protagonist was in the party with, since his sources did not contain information about the newcomer being able to defeat the big wolf. Urine, caught between the gaze of the knight and the girl, did not know what to answer. With a forced smile, he declared that he was in a party with a certain Bob. This statement was dubious, but the young man remembered a huge brute named Bob. The knight froze upon hearing the name. The protagonist broke out in a cold sweat, realizing he had gone too far, and he, too, was unable to utter a word. An awkward silence hung in the air. Finally, the knight remembered who Bob was and admitted that he really could defeat Big Claw Wolf. The young man silently thanked the mysterious Bob, whoever he was, because thanks to him, his deception seemed to have worked. The man asked Bob to come over. To the guy's great surprise, Bob found himself right in the guild room. A short but strong knight, who turned out to be Bob, approached them and calmly asked old Jonas what he wanted from him. Jonas asked Bob if it was true that he was in a party with the young man standing behind him. Urine and Bob exchanged glances. Bob casually replied that he didn't know the guy. There was another awkward silence. Everyone stared at Urine. Under their gaze, the hero began to justify himself, explaining that he had simply found the monster in the forest and had come to exchange it for money. He added that the monster had apparently simply fallen off a cliff. Old man Jonas scratched his beard and thought about it. He asked the young man if he really thought it was pure luck, since it was hard to call such a coincidence anything else. The girl from the guild turned to Urine, apologizing for the commotion. She had already opened his characteristics and was watching what was happening. The guild staff, having studied the data, confirmed that he was only level 1. The girl concluded that Urine obviously did not kill the monster. He simply picked it up after it fell off a cliff. At such a low level, the information about the cursed bracelet was not displayed, and the young man prudently hid it behind his back so that no one would notice. The man asked how he brought the wolf to the guild, but the girl explained that Urine had an inventory. He exclaimed in surprise and asked the hero again. After the affirmative answer, the old man decided that he could believe in anything. The administrator decided to organize an exchange. She apologized for the delay and handed him a huge bag of gold. Upon receiving it, the young man beamed with joy. He was surprised to find Jonas still there, but asked him not to worry. In response, the man assured him that with a skill like inventory, the hero would certainly cope, even if his class did not seem the most suitable. The knight then apologized for not introducing himself. He said his name was Jonas, and he was a B-rank adventurer who had reached level 200. His class was Duel Sword Master, and he was the face of this guild. He advised that if anything happened, they should contact him. Urine turned around and mentally noted that with such a high level, the man was obviously an experienced adventurer, and his role as the face of the guild was quite logical. Extending his hand, he introduced himself as Yurin, expressing his joy at meeting him. The protagonist promised to definitely contact Jonas if the need arose. However, he thought to himself that if the enemies were weak, he would simply ignore Jonas and continue to play by his own rules. However, he planned to continue cooperating with this guild, so he decided that it would be better to become friends. Soon the knight approached him with a request, and the boy prepared to listen with curiosity. The old man asked Urine if he would like to take part in the training program for newcomers. He added that, in addition to Urine, he already had several other newcomers, and participation in the program would help him establish useful connections. The old man literally glowed with anticipation. However, the main character remained unimpressed and just hung his head. Noticing this, Jonas asked what was the matter. Urine resolutely replied that he completely refused the offer. The man tried to rephrase his question, but the young man only repeated that he wanted to work alone. The old man laughed, noting that it would be quite difficult with his class, since the alchemist was a support class. The boy trembled with rage and clapped his hands loudly. Filled with anger, he ran out of the guild. Jonas shouted after him not to run away silently. The hero noticed a carriage with horses and rushed towards it. Urine shouted loudly to the driver, begging him to take him along. The driver seemed surprised to recognize him. The young man quickly jumped into the carriage. Jonas remained standing, watching the vehicle move away, still not understanding what had happened. Sitting in the carriage, the protagonist was despondent. He only wanted to fight strong monsters. Urine didn't understand at all why he needed any training for beginners. He didn't need it at all. He was angry. The carriage, drawn by a pair of horses, continued its journey into the distance. Suddenly, the young man jumped off it. The driver, an elderly man, turned to him, noticing that it seemed to have rained recently. He suggested that the hero take someone from his team, since they were almost to the forest. This news made the guy shudder. He immediately remembered Jonas, his happy face and persistent persuasion to join the team. However, Urine replied that he preferred to act alone. The young man continued his journey through the dense, overgrown forest. A horned rabbit watched his movements. Urine noticed that it had apparently rained a little recently, and wondered if they had already arrived at their destination. At that moment, the main character froze in surprise, looking ahead. His amazement knew no bounds. Suddenly, a giant level 102 spider appeared. The monster was covered in webbing, which it used to move quickly. The young man exclaimed that he had finally found his target, but he immediately panicked, realizing that he had given away his location. The hero covered his face with his hands, realizing that this monster's level was significantly higher than 100. This monster was several times stronger than all his previous opponents, so he needed to calm down immediately. Urine took a deep breath. He decided that it was time to strike first. The boy prepared his hands and arrows. The spear was greased with a special liquid. Everything was ready for the attack. The hero threw one of the arrows, shouting loudly that everything was ready. He decided to use the liquid he got from the frog. Using the skill mixing, he concentrated it several times, turning it into a deadly substance. Then, he soaked the arrows with it. Urine smiled, anticipating the beginning of the game. The young man had checked in advance that the giant spider in the game had low resistance to poisons. Suddenly, the spider released its web straight towards the hero. He managed to dodge at the last second. His eyes widened in surprise. During the fight, the giant spider launched a web over a long distance. attaching it to the ground or trees, and moved along it. The web landed very close to the guy. He noted with surprise that it was like a cannon shot. The spider rushed straight at him, trying to attack. In the last seconds, Urine managed to dodge, jumping to the side. He continued to run away from the enemy. The monster was making loud screams and whining, and the hero was laughing at it, making fun of its clumsiness. It would hurt him if the spider touched him. The guy pointed at the spider, noting that he had already fought such an enemy in the game. He thought that everything was going well, and this was the perfect development. The spider was very sticky, and if such a giant creature pushed him, he would undoubtedly die. But he was eager to win this fight on the edge. The young man smiled, then smirked. He realized that it was the struggle under constraints that truly captivated him. Suddenly there was an explosion that hit the enemy directly. He fell and screamed. Clouds of smoke spread throughout the area. The protagonist stood next to his opponent, who was defeated and badly injured. He himself was breathing heavily. Urine could not calm down. He looked at his screaming opponent, noting that he was not falling. The spider was barely standing. The hero rubbed his eyes, noting that about 3 hours had passed since the start of the fight. He thought that if the poison had spread faster, he would have won easily. But the spider couldn't get away with such speed. He'll have to endure it until the enemy gets tired. Suddenly, the main character froze, not understanding what was happening around him. Suddenly, a huge level 285 dinosaur appeared in front of him and bit the spider with its powerful mouth. The hero only managed to cover his face. It was an extraordinary predator whose length exceeded a meter. The monster tore and ripped apart everything in its path, revealing itself as an extremely strong creature that inhabits the most dangerous corners of the world. The young man froze looking at the monster, and bewilderment overwhelmed him. He couldn't understand how he ended up in this forest, where a dinosaur with such powerful jaws had just appeared. The giant spider he had fought so long and so exhaustingly was now lying dead. This new opponent was level 285, and this monster was incomparable to any he had encountered before. Fear gripped him when he realized the power of the new enemy. A barely noticeable anxiety rolled through Urine's entire body, because he understood that he could not cope with such a creature. Despite this, the hero suddenly smiled. A quiet laugh escaped his lips. He reached into the inventory and noted that it was simply magnificent. This was exactly the kind of unexpected monster he needed. Only under such conditions could he truly surpass his limits. The best party seemed about to begin. The protagonist realized that he was facing a dinosaur with huge jaws. In the world of fantasy and legend, such monsters were often considered medium difficulty opponents, but their power was undeniable. The young man remembered that in games, such creatures sometimes appeared completely unexpectedly, and he had overlooked this aspect. He stood next to the enemy, and the thought flashed through his mind that it seemed like the dinosaur was simply ignoring the smaller enemies. How could he, being only a first level, defeat such a powerful beast? Reason told him that he should immediately flee. After all, he was completely alone, without a team. However, this thought seemed boring to the boy. A smirk appeared on his face. He still held his bow and arrows in his hands. Urine released one of them, and the arrow pierced the dinosaur's body. The monster turned around sharply and took a deep breath. The hero assumed that a dinosaur with such powerful jaws probably did not have high resistance to poison. This thought prompted him to make a decision. He decided to play. Suddenly, the monster rushed at the guy, heading straight for him. The young man silently thanked the beast for such predictable movements. He rushed forward, slipping right between the dinosaur's paws, under its huge body. There, Urine attempted to plunge his dagger into the monster's body. Unfortunately, the blade passed by without causing any damage. The hero noted with annoyance that his attack was too weak to cause any harm. Meanwhile, the giant enemy swung its powerful tail. The lashing blow was intended for the guy who was very close. The tail was focused and aimed straight at the main character. The young man continued running, deciding to move straight towards his opponent. Suddenly his boots slipped. The hero felt it, but did not immediately understand what was happening. The next moment, he tripped and fell. The weapon flew out of his hands, and he could not comprehend what had happened. He remembered that he had been told about the recent rain in these parts. The boy flew straight into the bushes and landed hard. A loud scream escaped his chest from everything that was happening. The dinosaur calmed down and simply watched his defeated opponent. After a while, the guy opened his eyes with difficulty, realizing with surprise that he was still alive. He had not yet realized that the monster had only slightly touched him with its tail. The dinosaur still stood there, staring at the boy, but everything was swimming before the hero's eyes, and he couldn't focus his gaze. He was barely able to stand on his feet and was shaking. The thought that if this continued, he would actually die pierced him. The dinosaur's huge snout was very close to his head. The young man began to cough. He had absolutely no idea what was happening to him. The hero couldn't stop the surge of hormones. Emotions were overwhelming him. Urine internally thanked the dinosaur for putting him in such a desperate situation. A smile appeared on his face. The boy sat up a little, muttering that it was impossible to thank someone who gave such vivid experiences. He began to laugh. He convinced himself that everything was fine. He needed to come up with something to survive this situation. Maybe there was some kind of plan. He continued to laugh, but immediately admitted that he couldn't come up with anything. He decided that he could act even without a plan. The young man reasoned that the main thing was to avoid attacks. If he continued to dodge and counterattack from time to time, he would be able to defeat any monster. It was incredibly fun. He even thought that maybe he had lived for this very moment. A smile played on his lips. Suddenly, the dinosaur let out a loud scream and charged. The boy readied his weapon in his hand. The monster sped up, rushing straight at the boy. It looked extremely ferocious. The dinosaur's dark eyes were fixed directly on the enemy, and the main character just smiled, holding his weapon and preparing for battle. The dinosaur's mouth opened wide, revealing many sharp fangs and a powerful tongue. Urine's face changed dramatically, becoming incredibly determined and ready for any battle. Suddenly, a loud bark was heard, which literally knocked the guy off his feet. The dinosaur continued to run, but was unable to catch him. The main character's face expressed complete amazement. He was grabbed by the fox, who carried him away from his opponent by the scruff of his neck. Returning to consciousness, the protagonist was only vaguely aware of what was happening around him. He was being held in the teeth of a large fox, which was rapidly carrying him away from his formidable opponent. Suddenly, the beast abruptly dropped its burden, and the young man landed painfully in thorny bushes. The fox scolded him, insisting on preparing and drinking a healing potion. The guy noted that he was familiar with such things. The fox transformed into a familiar girl with whom the hero had already crossed paths. Urine drank the healing potion. The girl ran her hand through her hair and looked at the young man carefully. Her outfit was amazingly beautiful. The young man could not hide his surprise, looking at her unusual attire. She herself was radiating a glow, emitting light. The main character asked the girl if all his debts were now paid off, and waving his hand, asked her to leave. In response, the girl loudly demanded that he sign a contract with her, but the young man refused. The girl immediately stated that she had a super effective humanity skill and was an excellent target for a contract. She was puzzled why he was refusing such a wonderful offer. Urine explained to her that it was not about her efficiency or the goal itself. The girl could not understand what he did not like about her. However, the young man clarified that he initially did not intend to sign a contract with the monsters, since he plays in the so-called limited mode. The girl froze. The concept of limited regime was unfamiliar to her. The hero sat down and began to explain that it meant consciously setting limits for oneself. The girl, not knowing what limitation was, asked him again. The young man explained that, in a nutshell, it meant intentionally maintaining a weak state. The girl shuddered at these words. She wondered why he was doing this, but the guy replied that it was just more fun for him. The girl asked if all people acted like that, but the guy, remembering Rotten, who once called him stupid, explained that he preferred to play alone. He had imposed a limitation on himself, so he could not sign a contract. The girl put her hand to her chest and interrupted him, addressing him. She stated that she understood his desire to play alone. However, in her opinion, even if he made a contract with her, he would still be alone. After all, she was not an adventurer but a monster. And even if they fought together, he would still be the only solo adventurer. Didn't that fit his idea of playing alone? She asked. The boy frowned and thought. Rubbing his head, Urine explained that he had already spoken about his desire to defeat monsters solely with his own strength. He could not perceive her as an object, and therefore would not use her power. The girl was taken aback by this news. Her eyes widened in surprise. The young man nodded, wishing her luck. But the girl interrupted him, loudly asking where he was going. Urine turned around and said that he intended to go and repay the debt. The girl grabbed him from behind and exclaimed, "Is he really gonna fight a dinosaur with big jaws again?" She was perplexed how he dared to do this, because she had just assessed his level and knew that it was equal to 1. He was not capable of defeating such a monster. The protagonist was surprised that his level had already been revealed. The girl spread her arms, blocking his path. She loudly declared that she would not allow the boy to go there. The young man froze, not understanding what she was allowing herself to do. The girl loudly declared that he had saved her life, and therefore she could not allow him to go into mortal danger. She considered it her duty to stop him. The protagonist realized that she was a real bore. He explained to the girl that he had saved her only because it was beneficial to him. And, frankly speaking, her gratitude was of no interest to him at all, but only irritating. He asked her to move away again, but she loudly screamed that she refused. Yurin thought about what to do. He realized that it would probably be useless to insist, remembering how the girl in her animal form carried him away from the battlefield by the scruff of the neck. At that moment, an interesting and unusual idea came to his mind. The young man pointed his finger at the beast girl's face and said that in that case she would have to fight him. The girl asked in bewilderment why she should fight him. The guy explained that even in human form she remains a monster, and for a monster and a human to fight each other is completely natural. The girl quickly clarified that she was not going to fight him to the death. In response, the guy's face changed dramatically, and he grinned. Instantly activating his battle mode, he turned completely black, concentrating on the upcoming fight with the girl who stood calmly, blocking his way. The tip of the protagonist's dagger mercilessly darted towards the girl's face. However, she remained completely unperturbed, continuing to stand motionless and showing no signs of aggression. The young man moved the blade even closer, aiming straight at her eye. But even here, her face remained impassive. Such indifference deeply struck Urine, and his eyes narrowed in surprise. Taking a step back, the hero couldn't help but wonder why she didn't try to dodge. The girl just continued to stand motionless, reminding him that she had already stated her unwillingness to fight him. The young man merely scratched his head, admitting that such passivity made their confrontation completely pointless. They were still at the edge of the forest. Not wanting to continue this pointless dialogue any longer, the protagonist climbed over the thorny bushes to get away from the little beast. He admitted that with his current first level, defeating the jawed dinosaur would be extremely difficult. However, this only fueled his interest in finding new, unusual tactics. Moving through the thickets, he decided to observe the situation from afar. Urine was still hiding in the depths of the forest. A smile appeared on the guy's face. Turning around, he made sure that no one was following him. He was glad that the monster girl was not there. He felt relieved. As Urine had expected, the girl had lost all interest in the idea of signing a contract. Deep down, he apologized, admitting that he was a man who preferred to enjoy all the trials alone. The hero found himself in the middle of a familiar area, standing over a defeated enemy and could not understand where it was. He felt that it should be somewhere here, although there were no exact coordinates. The young man knew that defeating a dinosaur with huge jaws would be extremely difficult. Usually, increasing the level significantly increased the chances of success. However, he was playing in a special, limited mode, where a cursed ring prevented him from going beyond level 1. So this path was closed to him. Suddenly, his gaze fell on something, and he exclaimed to himself that this is it. Urine discovered a magic stone. The stone was very small, but holding it in his hands, the guy literally glowed with joy. He was glad that the stone had not been absorbed by anyone. He knew that the magic stone was a substance present in the body of every monster. This stone was used as a source of energy for artifacts. The hero recalled that it was for such a stone that he hunted a giant spider. He opened his stats window and saw that he had 48 SP. Thanks to the many monsters he had defeated, he had accumulated enough points. The youth spent 4 SP to master magic power management and also mastered magical energy. He reasoned that an alchemist was also a kind of master, and if he spent SP, he could master magic skills. Even with magic, he was too weak to use it. His goal lay elsewhere. He acquired the skill Magic Artifact Creation. This skill allowed the creation of magical artifacts. Magic stone processing was one of the key areas. Mistakes were unacceptable. A few more SP points needed to be distributed. He increased his existing skills. Now he decided to try to create an artifact. To do this, he needed a magic stone and a sticky thread released by a giant spider. He began to analyze the materials using magic energy sensing. Since the skill was only level 1, the analysis would not be very accurate. However, this was not critical, since he was not trying to create a completely new spell. The hero wiped his forehead and noted that the work was finally finished. He sank to the ground, exhausted. He understood that even preparing a magical artifact, which required the use of magical energy, took a colossal amount of his strength. It was difficult to use magical energy, but he was not surprised by his fatigue. The young man rubbed the bridge of his nose. He was happy. Using processing, he shaped the resulting object into a ring. Thus, the string control ring was born. Urine put it on his middle finger, checking how comfortable it was. Suddenly, the hero raised his hand and shot forward a whole web. The thread flew forward and hit the stone. The guy exclaimed that this ring was simply magnificent. It would be extremely useful. However, he knew that he would not be able to defeat a huge dinosaur with powerful jaws with just this ring, but that was part of his pleasure. Urine smiled. It seemed to him that the real pleasure came from battles with strong opponents. He launched the web again and again, enjoying the new artifact. The hero decided that it was time to go in search of the dinosaur. That giant beast, towering over the little goblins, wandered nearby. Many magical creatures had already been defeated by him while defending their families, and were now lying powerless on the ground. Urine watched this scene through binoculars, and finally exclaimed loudly that here he was. He shot several poison arrows straight into the dinosaur's body. He was pleased that the poison hit the target. The dinosaur let out a piercing cry. The young man knew that the eyes were the weak point of all creatures, and that was where the poison worked most effectively. At that moment, he was probably too excited about the sudden appearance of such a large monster. The hero knew the dinosaur's crushing abilities with its huge jaws very well. They included a powerful ramming attack, crushing jumps, and a lashing tail strike. The monster preferred only close combat, lacking such long-range attacks as fire-breathing breath. Despite its enormous size, the dinosaur had incredible leg strength and could move quickly in any direction. The young man remembered that it would be incredibly difficult to catch up with it. He had studied this in the game. It was at this moment that his newly created ring came to the rescue. The hero shot a web straight at his opponent, concentrating all his magic in it. Suddenly, the guy jumped on the web, deftly dodging the dinosaur's attack. He quickly secured the thread behind his back, tying it to a nearby tree. By shortening the thread, he instantly moved, moving several times faster than usual. At the same time, he continued to fire numerous poisonous arrows into the dinosaur's body. The monster shook from the hits, but slowly but surely succumbed to the effects of the poison. The protagonist relentlessly shot arrows at the giant body. He understood that the attack power of these arrows depended on his own strength, meaning that direct damage was small. However, the poison accumulated with each new hit. In addition, the hero planned to use a weapon whose attack did not depend on its basic characteristics to deal additional damage. He was sure that if he continued in the same spirit, sooner or later the dinosaur would be defeated. The attacks might not be the most powerful or varied, but the final victory would undoubtedly remain his. The hero watched his dinosaur opponent and realized that a long battle seemed inevitable. Despite his best efforts, many arrows were already scattered on the battlefield, and the monster still towered over them. Yurin noted to himself that, in general, this was even beneficial, since this way he would be able to enjoy what was happening longer. If his level was higher, he could probably win with one hit, but that would be boring. So now he was enjoying it to the fullest. The young man smiled, feeling truly happy. When the dinosaur suddenly pounced on him, the boy started to run. He noted that fighting for 3 hours straight was hard, and it was time to take a risk. Urine continued to run. He stopped and looked at his opponent. The hero understood that if he was lucky, the dinosaur would get a fatal blow, and if not, he would get it. Raising his hands, the hero decided it was worth a try. He waved them, and the dinosaur roared and continued to rapidly approach. Suddenly, something hit the monster in the mouth. The protagonist somehow climbed right onto his opponent's nose and delivered the decisive blow. The dinosaur tried to throw him off, vigorously shaking its head, but to no avail. The monster's mouth was completely open, and Urine immediately threw bombs there. An explosion thundered in the enemy's mouth. The dinosaur began to rush around the field, hitting rocks. The billowing smoke dispersed, drowning out the young man's cries. He struggled to hold on to the powerful jaws, but fell from them with a sigh. He landed on the hard ground and slid across it. The protagonist exclaimed that it was very painful. Urine realized it was just one blow, but the effects were so severe again. He noticed that it seemed like several of his bones were broken. He lay there, unable to move, and right in front of him, the dinosaur was still standing. The young man looked at him and noted that the enemy was incredibly resilient, and he himself was in great danger. He sincerely did not understand what to do, because the situation was extremely difficult. The dinosaur opened its mouth, looking straight at the protagonist. A burning steam came out of its mouth. The protagonist looked up and noted to himself that it looked like he wouldn't win. He liked to enjoy the moment, but he didn't want to die, so he decided to adopt a new tactic. Suddenly, a girl's voice was heard from behind him, asking if he needed help. The boy heard it, and his eyes widened. He turned around and asked if she really came to save him. The girl nodded, answering his question affirmatively. Urine asked how she could calmly endure the sight of a dinosaur with huge jaws. The girl stopped him and noted that she had one condition. The guy turned around, looked at her, and asked what the condition was. The girl explained that he needed to sign a contract with her. She added that in a desperate situation, if he used her power, he could survive. In addition, he would be able to tame a powerful monster like her. She wondered if this offer was not beneficial to him. The young man, in turn, asked why she wanted to make a contract with him so much. The girl explained that he had saved her life, and she had saved his. She believed that there was no stronger connection, so she decided to stay by his side. The young man froze at this news, unable to find an answer for a second. He thought he had heard her words, but he could not understand the specific look of this silver fox. The girl noted that he also valued his life. Yurin fell silent, unable to find what to answer, then nodded and confirmed that it was true, and that life was dear to him. The girl stood up, said that she understood everything, and offered to sign a contract with her. The protagonist replied that he had no reason not to take her hand. He thought that even if he fought like this, he definitely wouldn't be able to defeat a dinosaur with big jaws. He didn't want to die, but if he died, he wouldn't be able to continue his unlimited play. He was born in this wonderful world, and it would be too sad to die now. The hero realized that the current situation had turned into a defeat. However, Urine understood that if he managed to survive, he would be able to continue his adventures and battles. After all, life, as he always believed, was above all else. As the young man stood up, he felt a shudder run through his body, but this thought about the value of life remained unshakable. Meanwhile, the girl extended her hand to him, offering her help. For a moment, it seemed to him that the choice was obvious. But then a smug smile appeared on Urine's face. He slowly stood up, and, looking mockingly at the fox, declared that he did not want such a contract at all. There was obvious self-confidence and disdain in his tone. Urine stood there smiling, and his answer was a clear refusal. The girl loudly exclaimed that he should not be stubborn in such a situation, wondering why he so stubbornly refused to take her hand. The young man replied that relying on the strength of a little girl would be humiliating. The girl was confused, but asked which of them was the little girl. The young man admitted that he did not want to die, but he did not intend to live, covering himself with shame either. The girl continued, pointing out his contradiction, as he had just admitted his inability to win in his current state. She poked him in the chest with her finger. She reminded him that contracts were usually concluded here. The hero froze for a second, squinted and thought. He then explained that this time, events had not developed according to plan, and complications had appeared much earlier than expected. The young man lowered his hand into the inventory. He noted with regret that there was nothing else to do, and decided to remove one of his restrictions. The girl watched him attentively, not understanding the meaning of his words. While the girl was trying to comprehend what was happening, the guy took out some object from his inventory and took it in his hand. He reluctantly admitted that he really didn't like fighting with his right hand. He then took out the second dagger and secured it to his hand. The dinosaur was already approaching, showing off its powerful jaws. Meanwhile, the protagonist was waving his daggers, as if taking aim at the enemy. He muttered that he would still seem to be. The girl called out to him, exclaiming that he still hadn't gotten used to fighting with his non-dominant hand. The hero thought about her words. He explained that using his dominant hand would make the game too easy. The girl didn't understand. Urine explained that he was here for a second chance. In order to control his power, he set several restrictions for himself. The first and main limitation is to remain at level 1. The second is to act alone. And the third rule was not to use his right hand, since it was his dominant hand. The guy remained focused, a slight smile playing on his face. He explained that he had been training with these restrictions since he was a child to better control his immense power, which is why he sealed his right arm. That's why he threw all explosive devices with his left hand, and always held his knife in his left hand. Only for some special actions could he use his right hand. He even pulled the bowstring for his arrows with his left hand. And now that the hero could use both his hands, his right and his left, he was ready to show what he was capable of. He announced the start of the second round, deciding to begin the hunt immediately. The young man noticed that the dinosaur looked at him with disdain, as if it considered him an unworthy opponent. As the boy swung his weapon, he mentally noted that his body was exhausted to the limit, and even walking was becoming difficult. However, Urine had a ring that allowed him to control the threads. He released a thin but strong thread from it, which instantly secured itself to a distant tree. The young man flew over the dinosaur, rapidly reducing the distance. He continued to use the ring deftly, releasing new threads to maneuver around the monster. Suddenly, he found himself on the dinosaur's back and immediately stabbed it with his dagger. The dinosaur roared and turned around sharply, his gaze fierce and full of rage. The boy swung his weapon again, preparing to continue the fight. He approached the dinosaur, avoiding its powerful tail. Holding onto the thread, he took out his bow and began shooting at the enemy with many poisonous arrows. The arrows pierced the dinosaur's body. The protagonist was surprised to realize that by using his right hand, he felt no threat of losing control at all. He continued to mercilessly fire at the dinosaur, deftly dodging its powerful attacks. Suddenly, the hero prepared a homemade bomb and accurately threw it straight at the dinosaur. The monster was already breathing heavily from fatigue. The air was filled with thick smoke. The protagonist appeared nearby and with one precise movement plunged the dagger into the defeated enemy. The huge, powerful dragon let out a furious roar, and the hero laughed as he recalled the moment. He noted to himself that the blow had been delivered at an almost perfect height. 2 sharp daggers glittered in his hands. The boy felt the endorphins released in his brain lift his mood, making him forget about the pain. Even his previous limited regime was good. The hunt turned out to be quite successful, and he recalled with satisfaction how he managed to defeat the dinosaur. The girl, who was watching everything from the side, was in complete shock. She had absolutely no idea what exactly she had just seen. She couldn't believe it was true, and wondered if such a fighting style could belong to someone of the first level. She saw the hero literally pounce on the dinosaur. Using the analysis skill, she was indeed convinced that Urine's level was first. The girl looked at him, amazed. He struck, deftly dodged the monster's jaws, and acted with incredible forethought. She noticed that each of his blows was weak, but he was precisely waiting for the enemy's movements, finding his weak points and striking accurately. This huge dinosaur with big jaws seemed to be just helplessly beaten. She even felt sorry for the monster. The girl thought how good it was that she had not become an enemy of this guy, and she remembered his smiling face. The protagonist landed several critical hits and managed to defeat the dinosaur. Urine calmly landed behind the defeated beast. The dinosaur fell down dead, unable to move, only emitting loud death cries. The girl, watching what was happening, took a deep breath. The guy rose with difficulty from the clouds of smoke. Urine held 2 daggers in his hands and received a notification to gain experience to level up. However, due to the cursed ring, his level remained fixed at 1. He also gained SP skill points. The hero exhaled, wiping the dirt from his face. The girl watched closely but could not utter a word. Suddenly a thought struck her and she shuddered with fear. The boy exclaimed that this dinosaur, with big jaws, had caused him unexpected difficulties. The girl didn't understand what he was talking about, but she could see that he was angry and was stomping around. He noted that he had to remove one restriction, and it really pissed him off. He was very angry and upset. The girl still could not understand what was happening. The protagonist noted that at such moments he needed to look at the accumulated SP to calm down. He had 232 points. Urine sighed, deciding that he would decide on a plan for using the SP later. He needed to take the dinosaur into his inventory now. Suddenly, the boy paused and thought. He muttered that everything was very disgusting and sticky, and he had better go back to the city. The girl stood at a distance all this time, and only moaned. The guy turned around. Seeing her, the girl was frowning but silent, looking at him intently. Urine did not understand what she wanted from him and turned away, deciding that he didn't care if she stood there. He decided to go to the village at the foot of the mountain, find a cart, and teleport. The girl continued to follow him everywhere. The hero climbed the rocks, passed through evil swamps, but she still continued her journey after him. Yurin was not impressed by this and wondered out loud who was following him so persistently. Suddenly he turned sharply to the girl and loudly exclaimed what she wanted. The girl screamed in fear that she didn't want anything and was surprised by her own fear. She just sighed and noted that she still needed to deal with him. The guy bit his cheek and noted to himself that, as he thought, this would continue. He cried out that he didn't want this and sped up. He started running away from the girl, but she still chased after him. The guy fell to the ground, exhausted, and demanded that she leave quickly, calling it stalking. The girl didn't know what it was, but the young man was shaking and said it didn't matter. He began to move away from her. The protagonist decided that he was fed up and intended to ignore the girl. The fox asked him if it was difficult for him to agree, to which the guy shouted loudly. The girl looked at him with an empty gaze and could not find what to answer. And then she noticed that the hero constantly addressed her as hey or you, and this prompted her to introduce herself. Her name was Fenia. She asked the guy to wait and get ready, but he continued to walk away from her into the dark forest at the foot of the mountains. The main character reached the city together with Fenia. The guy watched the girl, who looked at her suit with surprise, admiring its beauty. When the girl hugged his hand, he abruptly threw it away. She again expressed her desire for him to call her Fenia. Urine distracted her by suggesting that she look in another direction. The young man noticed that she resembled a cute cat and imagined how she might meow. Then the hero quickly walked away from the girl, leaving her alone with the little kitten. Arriving at the guild, he apologized for what had happened. He placed a huge dinosaur head on the guild receptionist's desk. The girl screamed in horror. The receptionist couldn't understand why he brought a dinosaur with huge jaws, and it terrified her. The protagonist seemed to be used to such situations, and he was curious why she couldn't just calmly register his loot. The boy explained that the dinosaur was dead. However, the girl exclaimed that if the monster was dead, it was an even bigger problem. But the boy tried to calm her down, assuring her that there was no need to worry. The girl shook her head. She explained that she could not ignore this fact, as their guild closely monitored the activities of adventurers. At this moment, old man Jonas, who was called out from the side, drew attention to what was happening. The receptionist reported to him that the first-level adventurer had brought a high-level monster again. Jonas froze in place, not knowing what to say. He pointed his finger at the hero and called him by name. However, the young man himself was not particularly enthusiastic about this meeting with the old man. The man turned his attention to the defeated enemy, and was surprised to discover that it was a dinosaur. The knight asked how the main character had managed to get such a monster again. The young man quickly replied that it had happened by accident. He had happened to be nearby when the dinosaur had fallen off the cliff. The man exclaimed loudly, how could such a thing happen, especially considering it was a dinosaur with huge jaws? In his opinion, such a monster could not have died so absurdly. In response, the main character just gritted his teeth and noted that he had already used a similar excuse last time. The receptionist pointed her finger at the wound and noted that the dinosaur had a knife wound. Therefore, someone killed it. The knight concluded that this meant that Urine himself had killed him. The hero remarked that this made matters more complicated. The receptionist girl countered that this was impossible, since the man was a level 1 alchemist. The entire guild crowd began to turn around. The girl said she needed to check it through the rating system, and the guy's level was first. Jonas began to discuss how the hero was able to bring the dinosaur here, because the monster was much larger than him. The girl admitted that she did not know, but suggested that if it was the loot of other adventurers, He could have simply taken it. The old man noted that if this was true, it was a crime, but added that taking loot from others was not so easy. They continued to discuss the situation. The receptionist mentioned that she had not heard any complaints about such loot being lost, but she saw no other explanation for what was happening. Urine froze, and he did not understand whether he was now a criminal or not. He declared that such conversations were best conducted in his absence, and began to leave the guild. Suddenly, someone walked confidently towards him. It was Fenia. Standing in the guild, she put on her hood and pointed her finger, declaring that the man who killed the dinosaur with the huge jaws was right in front of her. The girl added that she had seen it with her own eyes that day. She pointed her finger at Urine. The hero grimaced, expressing his displeasure with her. The receptionist asked if it was true, and she didn't know if she could trust the girl's testimony. She thought about it. At the same time, she doubted that this girl was in a dangerous area with monsters. Besides, Fenia seemed very small and fragile compared to everyone else. The girl at the reception noted that she could not imagine why the girl would need to lie. Suddenly, an elderly man approached them, asking what was going on. It was the guildmaster himself, a majestic old man with thick eyebrows and a massive staff in his hand. The protagonist was clearly annoyed by the appearance of even the guildmaster himself, finding the situation extremely inconvenient. The receptionist girl explained the whole gist of what was happening to the guild leader in detail. He, looking at her with a sad look, made it clear that everything was clear to him. He then turned to Urine, who was not particularly enthusiastic. The guild leader asked if he really was the one who killed the monster. The boy confirmed his words without hesitation. The carcass of the huge dinosaur was still lying behind him. The hero noted that it was not easy for him to decide on the truth, but after Bob was instantly exposed last time, he did not want to lie anymore. The old man was silent for a moment and then shook his head, expressing his disbelief. The girl loudly exclaimed that he must have taken the loot from other adventurers. But the guild leader suddenly hit her with his staff, explaining that such statements cannot be made without evidence. He asked Yurin not to be offended. The girl obediently bowed before him, to which the main character replied that everything was fine. The young man noted what he thought was an expected reaction. Old man Jonas reappeared behind him. All three turned their gazes to him. The guild leader noted that such frankness was only to their advantage. He again asked Yurin to tell how he managed to kill the dinosaur with huge jaws. The protagonist thought for a moment, standing surrounded by a curious crowd. He noted that he could explain everything, but he doubted that they would understand. His face remained serious. Suddenly, his gaze stopped on Fenia, and he said that he had a much better way. The girl was attentive. Suddenly, the expression on the guy's face changed, and a sly smile appeared on his lips. Urine decided to replace the explanation with words. He thought that if he demonstrated it in practice, then everyone would understand. The guildmaster confirmed that it is better to see once than to hear 100 times. The protagonist asked someone to challenge him to a duel. He was thinking about who would be his opponent. Pointing at Jonas, he said that he was just right. He heard that he had already reached level 200 or higher. With such a strong adventurer, it should be fun. He played the game, and they fought a few duels. But fighting people is completely different from fighting monsters. It's a whole different depth, so this is a great opportunity. The guildmaster said that it was really to test the boy's abilities. This would be the best way. He asked Jonas if he would accept this challenge. The man answered doubtfully that he didn't mind, but his level was known to everyone. The difference was too high. He didn't think it would be suitable for measuring the protagonist's strength. Urine replied with a smile that he was the best candidate. He had defeated a dinosaur with large jaws that was beyond his strength. He added with madness that now he had to show everyone how much he could fight against such a strong adventurer. The man replied that he might be right. Urine was glad that he could now fight a strong adventurer. The leader standing nearby said that in that case, he would allow a duel between them. After a while, they were standing opposite each other in an open area. Behind the fence, a large number of people were watching them. The protagonist looked with anticipation at his opponent, who said that he was ready and offered him to start the duel whenever he wanted. The people present wondered who this guy was. They said he was a new adventurer, but they didn't understand why he wanted to fight Jonas. They say he destroyed a dinosaur with big jaws all by himself, and the duel is a way to prove that he really did it, because he is only level 1. They thought it was very reckless of him since a newbie couldn't beat Jonas. Moreover, They didn't have anyone in the guild who could beat him. Fenia watched the whole thing calmly. Urine thought that Jonas was the strongest in the area and decided to test him through evaluation. He was not just level 200, he was almost level 300. He was a master of large swords. The guy decided that it was great. The stronger the opponent, the more he wanted to fight. He didn't know why, but he couldn't do anything about it. After warming up his hand, he decided to start the duel. Jonas' language is known in the area as one of the most powerful adventurers, and he is proud of it. For adventurers, strength is directly related to level. Therefore, he perceives helping newcomers and consulting as part of his mission, as he considers it the duty of the strong. For an adventurer, there is always the danger of disappearing. But if he understands his strength and hunts within his capabilities, then the chance of this is minimal. And that's why he was worried about Urine. Alchemist is not a class meant for combat, but rather for production. Sometimes these unfortunate classes do become adventurers, but usually these young people face the reality of fighting monsters and quickly give up. He thought the boy would do the same. He has inventory, which means he cannot be an adventurer, but rather engaged in the production and transportation of goods from city to city. It would bring him more profit. Jonas supported the dreams of young people, but he doubted whether it would be profitable for Yurin. He swung the ball, preparing to attack. This duel was unlikely to lead to any serious fighting. Yurin calmly suggested to begin. The people present began to support the man, shouting at the newcomer to try at least a little. They decided that if no one bet on it, it wouldn't be gambling. Jonas doubted that he had actually killed the big-jawed dinosaur. However, one thing is for sure. If he did defeat the dinosaur, he will never defeat Jonas. Standing in front of the guy, he was thinking about a plan of action, that he would just push him or quickly touch him and everything would be over. Meanwhile, Yurin laughed, and Jonas mentally apologized to him. However, at that very second, the main character appeared right next to the enemy, drawing his small dagger and smiling broadly. His face was almost crazy. The people around him were watching this picture in shock. Jonas could not understand how this happened. The man was shocked by how easily the protagonist moved. It wasn't a special ability or skill. After all, alchemists shouldn't have such abilities. Suddenly, he was shocked to see the spider's threads right in front of him. He realized that it was this ability that allowed the boy to move so fast. He counterattacked Urine, realizing that his attacks alone weren't that strong. Although he had good potential, it wasn't enough to defeat a dinosaur with big jaws. His next blow caused the protagonist's dagger to fall apart. Jonas thought he was weak. However, his expression changed again and he prepared a new attack, which caused a powerful explosion. Jonas realized that it was a hand grenade. Although its power does not depend on the characteristics, it is sometimes used by anyone with extremely low attack power. It is a rather rare weapon. Thinking about this, they did not stop their duel. However, the hand grenade is extremely difficult to use. It requires a lot of training and perfect timing to use it effectively. It also needs to be used carefully to avoid hitting your allies. Seeing the smug face of the main character, the man remembered that this man was an alchemist. He could mass-produce hand grenades. In this case, using them was quite logical. More explosions occurred, which he defended himself from with his large sword. At that moment, Urine rushed past him, and having dodged the attack, used grenades again. Jonas said that even with his defense, he couldn't avoid the damage completely. But at this level, it doesn't pose a serious threat. The protagonist, who was behind him, shouted that he had caught him. The man realized that the hand grenade was just a distraction, and the real threat was the knife. He used his special shield dash skill, after which a protective screen formed in front of him, upon colliding with which the main character flew far away from it and crashed into the walls. The man was scared by this, because this ability is activated when he holds the sword horizontally before attacking the enemy. It protects and pushes back the enemy at the same time. Among the skills that Jonas has, this is the easiest to use and the most powerful. But using it against a level 1 adventurer was clearly too much. It was already excessive self-defense. In the worst case, he could lose his life. He shouted, asking if he was okay. The protagonist sat against the wall and did not move. They shouted at him to hold on and tried to find a healer among those present. Suddenly, a loud laugh came from Yurin. Jonas turned around and saw him standing up, saying that this was just fine. If it was too easy, it wouldn't be interesting. Continuing to giggle, he added that he wanted to play with the old man some more. The man shouted at him not to move anymore, otherwise the wound would get bigger. People also said that the man had already won, so they should stop. Jonas was shocked and couldn't understand what kind of person Urine was. He looked scary. It was impossible to tell whether he was winning or losing. He caused him some kind of hitherto invisible horror. With a mad face, he continued to laugh in front of him. Jonas thought that something was fundamentally wrong. He shouted to the adventurers present to stop the boy. They immediately pinned him to the ground. Jonas declared that this was enough. There was no need to continue the fight. Yurin was angry and did not agree with him. The men continued to hold him, but he resisted and hit them. He screamed at them not to interfere with the fight, because he had not lost yet. Jonas was speechless. He asked someone to treat him. Later, people gathered in the guild. The main character sat on a chair in the middle of them. The master said that he should first go home and rest, but he did not agree with this. The healer reported that it was all over. Yurin said with displeasure that everything was just starting to get interesting, and the body had already warmed up. Jonas replied that he was wounded and could not continue the fight in such a state. The boy replied that this was too soft. The man shouted that it was just a duel to test his strength. The protagonist thought, recalling the past, that wounds of this level were not a problem for him. He asked the master if they would exchange the dinosaur for money. He replied that he would have to consult with his superiors a little, so it would be difficult to transfer the money today. But he thought that everything would work out tomorrow, so he asked him to wait until then. He agreed and thought about his superiors. But he doesn't really need the money right now. Jonas said with a smile that he is confident in his abilities, and there have been no complaints about the loot being stolen. He thinks there won't be any problems getting the money. He was told that it was still strange that the level remained at level 1, even after defeating the dinosaur with big jaws. The guy replied that it was because he intentionally kept his level at level 1, using a special item. He has nothing to hide. The girl asked about this subject in shock. She did not understand if there was any point in becoming weaker on purpose. The guy answered with a smile that it was more interesting to remain weak in battle. This answer caused great confusion among those present. Later in the building, standing at opposite sides of the door, Urine and Fenia shouted loudly. Holding the door, the guy shouted at her to stop barging into his room, and she, in turn, demanded to be let in. He angrily added that he had said earlier that he would not sign contracts and that she should return to the forest. But she was persistent. Even if he didn't want it, she still wasn't ready to give in, no matter how much he refused. But he didn't care about such pressure. In any case, he demanded that she not climb into his room, but the girl had nowhere else to go, so she decided not to enter this room at all costs. People started whispering that something strange was happening. They felt sorry for the little girl, thinking that they should call someone. The guy realized that he could be arrested and decided to let her in and talk. She was happy about it. Sitting on the bed, he asked her discontentedly why she wanted to sign a contract with him so much. She sat opposite him on a chair, and it looked like an interview. She answered quite happily that she had already said that she had helped him and he had helped her. This was the highest form of connection. So she decided to stay close to him. He remembered with irritation that she had said earlier that helping each other as a reason for a contract was something like the special logic of monsters. But the girl replied that it was rather her mother's teaching. She said that if she met an adventurer she wanted to serve, she should make a contract with him. The guy imagined this picture and said that he already said that he wanted to fight alone. He thought that they had reached a dead end. In the game, you could just change the party. She replied that in that case, she would not participate in battles, and asked if that was okay with him. He asked what he would get from a contract with a monster that does not participate in battles. She replied that he would be able to travel comfortably on her back, and he would not have to rent a carriage, and the speed would be higher than that of a carriage. Coming closer, she asked if it sounded profitable to him, and if he was ready to make a contract with her. He thought it was really convenient, to be honest. The carriage was inconvenient to use. If he can move faster, he can hunt monsters that are far away. But if she says she's making a contract right away, it will look like he's taken in by her words, and that's annoying. He replied that he would not sign a contract, after which she hit her forehead against his, and they both shook with surprise. He said he would hire her as a vehicle. He would pay her a salary, pay for her food and housing. He would pay her for the service. That was the only contract. The girl answered contentedly that she would agree to this for now. But the time would come when he would make a contract with her. He answered that this would never happen. She said she never knew his name. He realized he really hadn't told her. even though his guild had been named several times. The girl grabbed his hand and said that formality was important, it was impolite. He gave his name, and she introduced herself in return, saying that he should remember it well. However, he responded by calling her nasty, and she called him names. Later, the guild leader apologized to the protagonist, saying that everything was more difficult than he thought and asked him to wait a little longer. Looking at the tasks on the board, the guy decided that there was no point in complaining. He wondered what kind of monster elimination quest would be suitable for his current level. Fenia asked him what he would hunt next. He replied that he had chosen his target. After a while, they were driving away from the city, and the guy said that now it didn't hurt him at all to sit, because everything was soft and fluffy. He thought that she was probably smiling smugly now. He added that it was surprisingly comfortable to sit, and he thought he didn't want to admit it, but maybe hiring her had been the right decision. She replied that in that case she would increase the speed, so he had better hold on. She suddenly picked up speed, which literally threw the guy off her back, and he grabbed her fur. He thought that if this continued, he would fly off and asked her to stop. She suddenly stopped, causing him to fly ahead of her and hit the ground. She didn't understand why this happened. It seemed like he didn't know how to hold on at all. Looking at the hole to the ground, she thought that she should slow down. He replied that there was no need. Now, he definitely would not fall. He used her fur to anchor his legs and arms. She said with displeasure that it was something sticky, but he suggested that she ignore it and go ahead. He was counting on her. They set off on their way. When he arrived, he said it was definitely faster than riding in a cart. He thought the shaking would make him sick. The girl was pleased with this, but for some reason it irritated him, and he hit her on the forehead too. She screamed, not understanding why he did this to her, and asked if that monster lived there. They were in a deserted area where there was no one. He answered that it was true if the information from the guild was correct. As he moved through the area, he thought about how they were close to the crater, so there were almost no trees. There were also few places to hide, so he had to be careful. Finally, he saw the monster they were looking for. It was a steel-scaled dragon, with a huge body covered in scales that reflected any attacks. Its wings were atrophied, so it could not fly. He asked the girl if she could remember his scent. She confirmed his words, and he told her that they were retreating. She asked again in surprise if he was going to fight. He replied that it would be difficult with such an opponent, but she was puzzled because he always rushed into trouble despite the danger. He replied that he would not enter a fight where he had no chance of winning. That was not like him. He added that his restrictive style was all about increasing his chances of winning through preparation. If you rush into a fight without it, it will end badly. He asked her to go away a little and asked her to return to her fox form. The girl changed, and they changed places. Upon arrival, she asked what they would do. He replied that they would make weapons. Last time he was here, he was collecting hot rocks. Now he was going to make a bunch of bombs. After that, they immediately got down to business. The protagonist decided to spend the skill to improve his skills at one go. With level 5 in the processing skill, many more options become available. For example, he was able to connect several objects and process them. Previously, he could only make hand grenades, but now he can create mines. Fenia clarified whether he was going to make many of them. He confirmed her words and added that there were other things that could be created. After that, he created a giant bomb that was the size of a girl. He beamed and added that it was because the processing had reached a new level. The damage was incredible, but it was too heavy to use as a grenade. The girl decided that it was of little use in that case. They'll have to figure out how to use it. He'll create as many large bombs as he can find the materials for. He'll also make whatever he can from the scraps of materials he has. He'll also process the items and get a poison knife. Besides that, he managed to make another flash grenade. It emits a bright light that blinds the enemy. It will be useful for escape. Fenia was not impressed by this anymore. She said that it sounds funny. They set off again, and the protagonist asked the girl how her night vision was. She replied that it was better than his. So he told her to take her to the next place. She didn't understand where they were going, because it was dangerous to walk in the dark. She wondered why he didn't turn on the light. He replied that the steel dragon was probably asleep at this time. They walked, talking in the dark, and Urine held onto her tail so as not to get lost. He said that monsters like dragons, which are at the top of the food chain, are active during the day, but those who might become their victims, on the contrary, hide during the day and come out at night, so he can prepare at night in peace. He decided to start by burying the mines. so he asked her to be careful and not to step on them. She understood him. After that, he immediately started his work, and the girl was bored on the sidelines. After a while, she couldn't stand it anymore and asked if that was all. He replied that it was not so, and would prepare more traps. Fenia tried not to fall asleep and yawned. Yurin said that he thought he would finish only by sunrise. The next morning, he informed her that he would act on his own, and that she should not interfere. She calmly replied that she understood him and would do nothing. He approached the sleeping monster, deciding that it was time to begin. He examined it through binoculars. The steel-scale dragon has scales made entirely of metal, which provides incredible protection. But because of this, her body is heavy, and she moves slowly. It has wings, but they can't lift it into the air. It's the perfect monster for him to hunt. So he decides to start with a bow and shoots the dragon right in the head. This made him jump up menacingly and growl all over the area. The happy guy said that this was exactly the kind of hunting he liked. The monster noticed him and ran after him. The happy guy started running away from him. Fenia watched from the side and did not interfere. The protagonist calmly dodged his attacks, periodically glancing to make sure the dragon continued to pursue him. After some time, he reached the right place and began to lure the dragon to where he had previously set up traps. The monster quickly ran straight towards him. However, he was caught in a powerful explosion, which made the main character laugh, because it was a minefield he had created. A monster as huge as the steel-scaled dragon simply cannot pass by. Naturally, he remembers where he placed them. He himself will not step on them. Meanwhile, the monster has already risen to its feet. Urine angrily shouted at him not to stand still. If he stopped, he would just use him as a target. After that, he took out his bow and started shooting at him. This enraged the dragon again. Even with low damage, the protagonist's arrows deal decent damage. And he had already checked in the game that she had weak protection against poison. He suddenly shouted at the monster not to go there, because there were mines there too. But the monster continued on its way, so the protagonist decided it was time for him to run away. He used his thread control ring, which allows him to move instantly, and he disappeared right from under the monster's nose. He said that as expected from the rest of the scaly dragon, she is not fast, but her powerful legs allow her to close the distance in an instant, which is impressive. However, there was another hole ahead of her that she fell into. After that, the protagonist decided to apply the final touch and used all the nets. He had set up a giant bomb in advance, tying it to strings on a tree so that it would fall when the cliff fell. He realized that he had to run as fast as he could before the blast hit him, and he headed for the nearest rock. A bright flash illuminated everything around him. After the smoke had cleared a little, the protagonist came out of hiding, realizing that it was very dangerous. If he had slowed down a little, his word would have exploded. He wondered if he had hit it. The giant bomb had definitely hit the steel-scaled dragon. In theory, it should have been enough to finish her off. A sudden scream rang out, so loud that the wind from it literally shook Urine. He was shocked to see that the monster was still alive, and laughed. Looking with delight at the monster standing before him, he said that if she was destroyed by this, he would be upset. He shouted to her that all the fun was just beginning, so he offered to throw her an unforgettable party. Looking closely at the monster, he saw that the outer shell had been torn off, revealing the insides. The dragoness had an extremely high resistance to attacks, thanks to her scales. Now that the scales had fallen off, her defenses were greatly weakened. His own damage is so low that it hardly makes a difference. However, he stopped more mines and giant bombs everywhere. As long as she continues to chase him, he simply lures her into traps. He dodged her attack once, saying that he has a thread control ring, so dodging is a piece of cake for him. Does she really think that not stepping on the ground is a good idea? So she can get another gift, a bomb. The monster continued its movements, and the protagonist moved around it, preparing new attacks. He hit it again, and thought that everything was going well, according to plan. And just a little more, and they would reach the next trap. Suddenly, he was surprised that the monster stopped in place. He also froze, not throwing the prepared projectile at her. The dragoness is a ferocious monster that mercilessly attacks any adventurer. But this monster turned its back on him, although they say that sometimes they run away if they understand that they can win. At this moment, the monster was approaching the cliff. Pushing off with her hind legs, she jumped straight into the abyss. He was surprised that such a huge body could also fly smoothly. He realized with irritation that jumping off this cliff would be difficult. If he went around, his legs would not catch up with her. So he shouted loudly, calling for Fenia. The girl in the form of a giant fox immediately appeared next to him, asking if he called her. He said that the dragon had escaped and asked if she could find her by scent. She replied that it was easy for her, and he asked her to take her to the target. They immediately started running, and she told him to climb on her back so they could catch up with her in no time. They quickly set off in pursuit. Fenia asked if they could defeat her. The guy answered doubtfully that, to be honest, it had become difficult now. She was surprised, because it was rare to hear him say such words. She watched his battle from afar, and it seemed to her that he dominated the entire time. He replied that this dragon had gone too far. There were no mines or giant bombs installed in that place. She asked why he shouldn't install new ones. He thought that he had some spares and could install new ones. He replied with irritation that setting new traps might be pointless. She didn't understand why that was so. He replied that his trap strategy was based on the monster coming at him. He used himself as bait to lure the enemy into the trap, but the dragoness chose to run away from him. If she continued to run, he would not be able to trap her. Even if they met again, she would most likely run away again. She suggested that he use his bow or throw hand bombs in that case. He replied that the bow and hand bombs did too little damage. If he could not defeat her by sunset, the hunt would fail. By chasing a fleeing enemy, he would have fewer opportunities to attack. Low damage takes time. If he didn't defeat her before nightfall, it would be a failure. She agreed with him, because it was too dangerous to fight at night. At night, he won't be able to see her. Fighting in such conditions is extremely risky, and if he turns on the light, he can attract other monsters. If another monster appears during the battle with the steel dragon, he will not be able to cope, and in general, he simply will not have enough strength to continue the fight at night. She asked him if he was at a dead end. He asked her again, displeased, why she was so happy. The fox was smiling at that moment. She replied that if he couldn't cope alone, they could do it together. So she offered him to make a contract with her right now, but he was categorically against it and told her to look ahead, because it was dangerous. She said he was too stubborn a man, it would not be easy for his wife. He answered with displeasure that it was rude, but she said it was true. Finally, they approached the place where the dragoness was. She clarified that if he refuses to sign a contract with her, it means he has another plan to win her over. Waving his hand at her, he agreed with her and added that she should just watch and not interfere. Coming out of hiding, he said that they were now moving on to round 2. He charged at the steel dragon, screaming that he missed her. The monster immediately noticed him and growled. He began using the threads in his rings again to balance and dodge the monster's attacks. The dragon continued to attack him furiously. He noted with satisfaction that no damage was being dealt to him at all. If he continued like this, he would eventually lose. But if he attacked head-on, he would be outsmarted and that would be the end of the game. So, to turn the tide, he needed a new ability. He spent special points to get a physical critical attack. Critical attack, as the name suggests, is an ability that sometimes allows you to increase your physical attack power. It is usually an ability reserved for swordsman-related classes, and swordsmen can obtain it for only 2 points. But since he is an alchemist, he had to pay 28 points. He stopped not far from the monster. After that, he decided it was time to see if the critical attack would work. He dealt a quick blow to the monster, causing it to roar. From this reaction, the protagonist knew it had worked. However, the monster quickly recovered and began to look around. Urine said that because its original attack power was too low, even a critical attack would not do much damage. But there was nothing to be done about it. He took a bottle of poisonous liquid from his inventory and drank it. With a crazy smile, he said that now he was in a poisoned state, and it was time for him to get a new ability. He spent points to get a stinging poison blade. This is an ability that is only available in the poison state. When the user is in this state, the critical attack power increases significantly. After that, he spent points to get the Pyre of Destiny. When his health drops below 30%, the critical attack power is doubled. Stinging Blade and Pyre of Destiny. Both of these abilities double the power of the Catholic attack. In other words, their combination gives an incredible boost. He felt a sharp pain and cleared his throat, realizing that both had their drawbacks and it hurt. Laughing, He knew that soon his health would drop below the required point. Now the real fun would begin. He went to attack the monster again, but missed. If the critical hit worked before his health dropped to 0, he would win. He tried to figure out what his chances were. Insanely, he decided to see who would win first, the critical hit or him staying alive. She attacked the monster again and again, but each time he missed. The monster did not take any damage and continued to roar in place. And so, once again having attacked with his dagger, and the main character realized that he had finally hit and his attack had worked, the monster trembled. After that, the monster fell to the ground with a crash. A notification appeared that the protagonist had received experience related to leveling up, but due to the cursed ring, the level remained fixed at first. Urine sighed and fell. Fenia came running, calmly asking if he was okay. He replied that he was not okay, and if this continued, he would lose his life from the poison. She asked what she needed to do. She didn't understand how stupid he was to be poisoned so many times. He thought it was annoying, but he had no strength at all. He knew the antidote had to be in his inventory. Fenia recognized the potion he had made for her. He took it out with trembling hands, but he couldn't hold it in his hands, so he asked the girl to give it to him. She agreed with him, and turning into a human form, began to pour the medicine into his mouth. Sometime later, she was still sitting next to him. The antidote bottle was lying on the ground, and a little to the side the monster was lying. She asked him if everything would be okay now. He thought that her face was even more worried than his. He replied that everything would probably be fine and lost consciousness. Sometime later, he woke up and thought about his condition. He realized that he seemed to be alive, but it seemed that he had simply lost consciousness. A joyful girl rushed into his arms, saying that she was very worried about him. He asked her to leave him alone, because he didn't ask her to worry. She said with displeasure that he was very cold to her, because she was so worried about him. They are bound together by one fate. It goes without saying that they should worry about him. But he doesn't remember ever agreeing to such a relationship. She added happily that he could say that for now. But soon he himself would begin to need her. He replied that this would only pass if the world turned upside down. Looking around, he asked again, puzzled, where they were. She replied that it was the same cave they had already used. He thought that there was no need to worry about meeting other monsters. Here it was a safe place. She added that she had brought something else here, so he should thank the strong girl. When she came outside, she added that she hadn't brought it inside, so she left it outside. He looked at it with admiration and thought that it was good that the other monsters hadn't had time to eat it. He stroked her head and said that she had done a great job and thanked Fenia. His words and actions made the girl blush in embarrassment. Pushing his hand away, she shouted at him not to treat her like a child. He replied that she clearly looked like one. She shouted annoyed that she looked like a child, much older than him. He thought that in general, considering that she was a monster, the discrepancy between her age and appearance was not surprising. So he replied that he understood her and apologized for the tactless question. Then, since the conversation was on the subject, he decided to ask how old she was. This made her even more embarrassed. Turning away, she was irritated that he also started asking her age. He realized that this was bothering him and grabbed her head. He was tugging at her hair and telling her that she was not a girl, because she was not a human being. She screamed at him not to do that, because he would ruin all her hair. When they arrived at the guild, the leader said that it would not be possible to exchange money for now, and asked for forgiveness. They were in a bit of a mess there right now. The protagonist was surprised that the exchange had failed. He was suspected of stealing because he was only level 1, but as he was told, after the duel his abilities were confirmed, and there were no victims of the theft, so the suspicion should be removed. This made him very angry. He said that it was taking quite a long time. He had been told earlier that everything would be ready the next day. For this, the old man apologized again. After this, he asked if he could ask him one question. He agreed, and was asked how he was connected with Count Mercadal. He wondered if the Count was his father, but he had been cast out of the family, so he didn't want to think it mattered. He replied that he did not recall anything of the sort. Then he asked how he was connected to the matter. The old man replied that it was difficult for him to speak about it in public, but it seemed that the Count strongly suspected him. The boy understood him. He remembered the guild leader saying that he would consult with his superiors. It seemed that his father was among them. Because of the pressure from him, things were becoming difficult for him too. Yurin said that he understood everything about exchanging loot for money in the guild, but he clarified, despite this, whether it was possible to give them the monster for safekeeping. When the suspicion is removed, the exchange can be carried out. The guildmaster said it was no problem, and called Elena. She immediately asked what happened. The protagonist finally understood her name. The chief said that the guy brought a monster, and therefore she should register it for safekeeping. The girl understood everything, and enthusiastically clarified what kind of monster. This time, she would definitely not be surprised. Looking away, Urine wondered what kind of statement this was. He showed the monster he brought this time, causing her to scream louder than usual. She didn't understand how he could destroy the steel-scale dragon. It was impossible. She started screaming that he might have stolen someone's loot again. The guy had a feeling of déjà vu, and the old man hit the girl with his staff, saying that she shouldn't make such statements without evidence. She apologized for that. The chief said that they would take it for safekeeping, but Elena tried to object that they had no more room. She remembered Jonas saying that a strong monster was not so easy to catch. The boy understood why she was so surprised. The people present were trying to deal with the monster and the chaos, helping each other. As they walked out the door, the boy said that if his father had interfered, it could be a serious problem. Sitting on the bed, the main character said that if he couldn't exchange the loot, it would be a problem. Fenia noticed that he seemed to be in some kind of trouble. He suddenly realized that he had not explained to her why he had been thrown out of the house. He said that it seemed like his father was trying to hurt him somehow. She was amazed by this with tears in her eyes, and said that it seemed like he had been through a lot. He was amazed by her words. She added that it must be painful that he was thrown out of the house. He answered in the negative, because he, on the contrary, considers himself lucky, because now he can live as he wants. The girl, shocked, replied that he really was an unusual person, but in that case, he was not good. She asked what he was going to do. He leaned back on the bed and said indifferently that maybe time would sort everything out on its own. Meanwhile, the stunned man asked again if it was true that Urine had brought a high-level monster to the guild again. He asked if there was any evidence of his wicked actions. They answered him in the negative, causing him to slam his fist on the table, causing the man to tremble. The father shouted that Urine was an alchemist, so he couldn't hunt a monster. There was something wrong. They told him he was absolutely right. The man said that he needed to be examined properly. There was definitely a catch. The servant understood his order. Sitting back in his chair, the man sighed. There was a knock at the door and Imanol came in, saying he had news. The father asked what had happened. The guy happily said that he had leveled up again. The guy supported him, saying that he was his pride. He thought that it was natural, since he had allowed him to level up as efficiently as possible from the very beginning. They paired him with strong adventurers, and they hunted high-level monsters together. Strong adventurers normally have no reason to work with weaker ones, but they motivated them with good rewards. This is a training method only available to rich aristocrats. Imanol added that he heard that Urine was hiding something. The man replied that it was not worth his attention. He ordered him to focus on his own affairs, because he was the future head of their clan. With tears in his eyes, the joyful boy agreed with him. After which he left, and the man said that even after the expulsion he continued to pester him, but he would definitely expose his dirty deeds. He could enjoy his peace while it was possible. Meanwhile, in the guild, the main character sat discontentedly at his table, a plate of food in front of him. People were chatting cheerfully around each other. Fenia sat opposite him and ate her food with pleasure, saying that it was very tasty. The guy asked her to eat more slowly, to which she enthusiastically replied that it was just the first time she ate such delicious food, so she was in a hurry. Covering her mouth with her hand, the guy asked her not to talk. With her mouth full, she should think about what it was like for him to see it. Covering her mouth with her hand, she apologized. He thought that for her, who had lived like a monster before, the opportunity to eat cooked food was probably a great rarity. Fenia asked him what he was going to hunt next. He replied that he didn't know yet, because even if he destroyed the monster, the guild wouldn't accept the prey. He thought that maybe, to ensure a minimum standard of living, he should go underground. The girl beamed and enthusiastically accepted his idea. True, there was no dungeon nearby. In the neighboring town, I think there was one. The girl asked how far it was. He answered that with her, it wouldn't be too difficult. He added thoughtfully that his father's influence probably no longer extended there, so they could exchange the loot without any problems. Suddenly he noticed that the glass on his table was shaking. Everyone present noticed this and became scared. Fenia screamed, not understanding what kind of shaking it was. The protagonist asked her to calm down. The food on the table continued to shake, the glass fell, and the water spilled. She said that an earthquake is a rare occurrence, I guess. While the main character was looking around, the girl quickly finished her food. He said irritably that the noise in the street was probably due to an earthquake. There was a scream that indicated that a new dungeon had appeared. The boy immediately ran out into the street, shouting for the girl to hurry up. There were already a large crowd of people there. When he ran, he said that the shaking was due to a new dungeon appearing. It must be because the dungeon was created recently. The girl lagged behind him and asked him to wait, because it was hard to run after eating. Soon, they found themselves near a dungeon that appeared among the rocks, with fallen columns and stones lying nearby. He looked at it happily and rushed forward. Fenia tried to squeeze through the people. He was overjoyed at the dungeon that had appeared, but he crashed into Jonas standing in front of him and fell to the ground. The man asked him what he was doing there. The guy answered with displeasure that he wanted to go inside. Without thinking, Jonas answered that he couldn't go in there. He added that it is not yet clear how dangerous this new dungeon is. They cannot just let people in. The irritated guy thought that it was all the more interesting, precisely because it was dangerous there. He asked what he had to do to get inside. He replied that he thought he would send a research team there tomorrow. If it turned out that he was not dangerous, then they would probably let him in. The protagonist replied that he understood him. He thought to himself that he remembered how in games weak adventurers were not allowed into such places just like that. There was a restriction at the entrance. He imagined himself not being allowed into the dungeon. If it turns out to be an easy dungeon, they might let him in. But that's boring, and it's rare to experience the real thrill of an unknown dungeon. Not knowing what monsters might appear, preparing for any surprises, is very exciting. He would like to join the research team. He said that he wanted to join the group too. Jonas replied that no one would take a newbie like him into the group, so he shouldn't even try to force his way in. The man hit him on the head and asked him if he really liked fighting. He added that tomorrow, if he begged with all his might, he might be allowed to come. The guy happily said that he understood him and thanked him for the information. He thought that there was no point in arguing here, it would be better to retreat. He said that this was a new dungeon, it was getting more and more interesting. If so, we should prepare for tomorrow. When the girl transformed into a large fox, the boy saddled her and ordered her to go into the forest. She understood him, and after a while they began collecting medicinal herbs. Having collected a whole bunch, the happy guy said that this would be enough for him. The girl held only a few leaves in her hands, saying that she had collected only this. She said with displeasure that he had found many times more than she had, and that it was difficult to find anything here. He replied that he had an assessment skill that allowed him to determine what could be collected. The difference in results is inevitable. Rather, it is surprising that she found so many without skills. She replied that she wanted to be even more useful to him. He stroked her head and said that this wish was enough. He remembered how she had removed his hand earlier and pulled away. She said doubtfully that he was kinder than usual, so she wondered if he had been replaced. He thought these were strange accusations and said that he was always kind, and asked her not to bow her head in silence. He asked her what she thought of him anyway. Without hesitation, she replied that he was crazy, thirsty for battle, or berserker. He thought they were the same thing. Urine replied that he liked to fight, but he thought he had kindness too. She looked at him again, puzzled, and he gave in. In any case, he was going to make a healing potion and asked her to help. She happily agreed with him. Looking at the large number of bottles and leaves, she wondered why he needed so many potions, since he didn't use them during the fight. Meanwhile, the guy began to create the medicines he needed. He said that healing potions do not heal instantly, and for him, with his paper protection, they are not particularly useful. The girl asked him again. He added that even if the potion restores all health, if the overall health is low, it will still be destroyed with one hit, so he rarely uses them during combat. Besides, they make him sick. She asked again and clarified why he made so many of them. He answered with a smile that it was a surprise for later. There was a bustle in the guild. People were animatedly discussing something, preparing their weapons. The protagonist and Fenia came there. The chief reported that the meeting about sending an investigation team to the new dungeon that appeared in this city was beginning. Everyone listened to him attentively. He said that they didn't know how difficult this dungeon was and what kind of monsters were there. Therefore, they had to be prepared for anything. They needed the strength of adventurers more than ever. The room filled with excited voices. They began to form an investigation team. Those wishing to join had to raise their hand. The protagonist did so without hesitation. The master added that only adventurers of rank C or higher with a level of at least 100 could join the exploration team. He thought that this was a mockery, and other people had already started to raise their hand. He thought that he wasn't going to give up because of such a trifle. Everything was going as he expected. He approached the guildmaster and asked to be allowed to join the research team. The tense man apologized to him and said that because they were dealing with an unknown dungeon, they could only allow adventurers of level 100 or higher to participate. But the protagonist was not going to give up. He asked what he could say, looking at what he was offering. A tower with a large number of potions appeared in front of them. People shouted that it was simply unbelievable. They had never seen so many advanced healing potions before. After all, their price was about the same as the cost of materials from monsters of level 100 and above. Urine agreed with them, because an advanced healing potion is a very rare thing. Alchemists can create them, but most of them are unable to gain enough skill points due to their weakness in combat. As a result, they cannot level up their mixing skill to level 4. Therefore, such potions rarely appear on the market, which makes them very expensive. And this is a great subject for negotiation. People said that with such advanced products, clearing the dungeon was a piece of cake. They praised him. He said that they could use the potion to clear the dungeon, but he added that he had a condition. The master asked him what he meant. He replied that they had to let him join the investigation team. The old man thought about what to do. Jonas said that he thought he could take him along. Although he was only level 1, he had already proven his abilities in a duel with him. Plus, he offers them so many advanced healing potions. He's just the perfect candidate for the role of a healer. The guy was annoyed that he was considered only a healer. He was pleased that they thought highly of him, but he would have preferred to be in the vanguard, where the chances of fighting monsters were the highest. The man and the old man looked at him with satisfaction and asked if they all agreed to let him join. People said that he had proven himself to be on par with Jonas. If he focused on treating them, the risk would be minimal, so there shouldn't be any problems. Especially since Jonas says so, they don't mind. So they decided that they would take him with them to the dungeon. The master replied that if everyone had decided so, he could not object. Jonas told Yurin that he was very lucky. The main character was still unhappy with the role that was coming to him, but he thanked the man. Jonas added that he believed that his participation would benefit everyone. Therefore, he should try to live up to expectations. The guy angrily replied that he had planned it that way from the beginning. He laughed in response. Suddenly, Fenia's cry was heard, insisting that he too go with him to the dungeon. People asked who this girl was and suggested that she stay at home and wait for her father to return. She angrily replied that they shouldn't treat her like a child. In fact, she was older than all of them. Jonas noted that something similar had happened before. Yurin was annoyed. Pointing at her, he said that she was his tamed monster and asked if he could take her with him. This caused confusion among those present. Jonas leaned towards her and said that she did not look like a monster at all and asked if he was sure. The guy thought that he hadn't actually made a contract with her yet, but it was just a formality. He said that if they looked through the identification, he would see that she was above level 100. Jonas doubted whether it was true. At that moment, Alina appeared, smiling, and could check the level of those present. She replied, amazed, that she was indeed level 100. If that was true, then no problem. Fenia laughed and said that she would go with him now. The guy replied that, frankly, he didn't mind leaving her at home, which amazed her. She screamed at him not to say such terrible things, because they were bound by one destiny. Where he was, there she was. In the end, he agreed with her. People were discussing who they were and were jealous of their relationship. Yurin said he didn't care who was going, as long as he could go. Alina didn't understand what was wrong with them. Jonas said he didn't know either. Jonas announced that from now on, they would begin their invasion of the unknown dungeon. He asked those present if everyone was ready. The people agreed with him. They immediately set out and entered the dungeon with the protagonist and Fenia following behind them. The dungeons in the game he played had different features. Depending on the location, the properties of the monsters that appeared there would change. He assumed that this dungeon would be the same, and he was very curious about what it would be like. Suddenly he found himself alone inside, trying to figure out where the path they were on had gone. He began to examine the walls carefully. It seemed to be the kind of dungeon where you couldn't get back out once you entered. Usually, if you go back you can get out, but not in this case. After knocking on the walls, he realized that they were real. So to get out of there, you either need to defeat the boss or find an exit portal. The first option is probably real, that's how the dungeon is designed, but we can't be sure about the second one. And another problem, all the other adventurers have disappeared. There were about 20 of them, if he was not mistaken. There was a similar dungeon in the game too. When a group of people enter, they are scattered to different parts. They called him the Party Destroyer. If the others had moved to the same location, they could meet. But if they had been thrown into other dungeons, they would have to go through everything alone. He listened to the sounds in the distance. It sounded exciting to him. He readied his weapon, deciding that unknown dungeons were always full of surprises. He saw goblins ahead and knew that this was what he was looking for. He began to attack the monsters one by one, striking them with precision. They only screamed in response, and soon they were all defeated. The protagonist started the map and found a weapon, a goblin club. The monsters are the same. The difficulty of this dungeon is apparently low, maybe because it was a solo playthrough. He noticed a staircase leading down. Dungeons are usually designed so that the deeper you go, the stronger the monsters become. And at the very bottom, there is always a boss. Although there were probably other adventurers on this level. Maybe it was worth looking around a bit, but deciding that he was tired of the goblins, he began to descend. There he met level 5 wolves. These are predatory monsters that move on all fours. They immediately bared their teeth at him. They are the same level as the goblins, nothing special. The dungeon is generally easy, except for the fact that you have to go alone. He readied his weapon again. He ran past the enemies and dealt them blows. He was used to solo runs, so it was okay, but support classes like healers would have a hard time. Then he encountered a large creature that was destroying people. The difficulty increased a little by the 5th floor, but it was only level 25. The monster immediately rushed to attack him, quickly approaching. The guy ended up on the ceiling right above him. He jumped on him and dealt him a few blows, quickly dispatching him. He poisoned him. No problem with monsters of this type. Honestly, I would have liked something more challenging. He reached a new staircase. There he met a werewolf, a bipedal wolf-like monster with sharp fangs. It is bigger and stronger than a normal wolf. The boy inhaled and said that after fighting a level 532 steel-scaled dragon, this seemed insignificant. He had already killed so many small monsters, the main thing was not to relax. He threw a flash noise grenade towards the werewolves. A bright flash blinded them. This disoriented them in space, after which the guy immediately threw a grenade at them by hand, and finally, he used a poisonous knife. The notification appeared again that his level had risen, but because of the cursed bracelet, he remained at level 1. Looking at the defeated enemy, Yurin said that it was very easy. He quickly dealt with the rest and added that it was very boring. He wanted to meet a strong monster. If he moved further, he might get lucky. After a while, he reached a strange door that looked like an exit. It was like a wormhole. You can't see what's ahead. He wondered if there was a boss behind this portal. Entering the portal, he decided he had no choice but to go. Inside, he was met by Fenia, who rushed towards him, shouting that she had missed him very much. He was not particularly happy, and she said that it was a very touching meeting, and he should act accordingly. But he still did not understand anything. She asked him if he wasn't glad he met her. He answered without much enthusiasm that he was glad. She didn't like his answer very much. After looking around, the protagonist asked where they were. Urine said that they were still in the dungeon. That was understandable. The girl replied that it was a rally point. At that moment, a satisfied adventurer approached, saying that he didn't expect a guy of his level to go that far. Urine replied that all monsters were weak. The man added that if someone else had said that, he might have believed it, but it didn't sound convincing coming from him. The protagonist asked what this place was. The man replied that it seemed like this dungeon forced him to go through alone, but eventually brought everyone here. That's why they called it the rally point. The boy understood him and noticed that there were no other adventurers in sight. The man replied that it was because they had split into 2 groups, and each had gone through their own gate. He pointed to the passages to the side. Probably one gate leads outside, and the other to the boss area. That's what they assume. Urine asked if he was the last one. The man replied that there were still those who hadn't come, and asked how many levels he had passed to get here. Urine replied that it was somewhere up to the 10th. The adventurer said that it meant that the number of levels passed varied for each person. This surprised the guy. The girl said that she had only reached the 3rd level. Urine asked what level he had reached. He replied that he was level 6, so 10 was a lot. The protagonist thought that it was understandable, that it was no wonder he was late. The man added that, frankly, he didn't expect him to get there, since he was only level 1, so they decided he was gone. Urine thought that wasn't surprising. The adventurer added that the girl was the only one who believed he was okay. She said he couldn't just lose his life in a place like that. The man asked what they were going to do now. Urine asked what he was doing. He replied that he was waiting for other adventurers, both those who came from outside and those who returned through the gate. Urine realized that if those who came outside returned, it would become clear which gate led where. The adventurer said that it would be best for them to stay with him. He had food. The guy apologized and said that he would go further. The man asked him if he was sure, because it could be the boss's area. Satisfied, Urine replied that that's why he would go there. He thought that the dungeon boss was probably strong, it was a great target. Fenia said that she would go with him. The man replied that he had no right to stop him, he could do whatever he wanted. But he asked the boy to leave some healing potion for the wounded who would come here. The boy agreed with him and left a large number of bottles. The man thanked him with a happy smile. The protagonist said that it was time to decide what the exit gate or the path to the boss was. The chances were 1 to 2. Without thinking twice, he headed towards one of them, deciding that he was choosing the boss's area. The girl calmly followed him. Earlier, Jonas was fighting monsters and thinking that he had only reached level 5. It was hard for seekers with support professions here. When he reached the passage, he wondered what kind of place this was. Inside, he saw other adventurers asking him if he was okay. They started talking to each other, healing their wounds. After a while, one of them asked what they would do next, since there was no point in waiting any longer. He agreed. He said that everyone agreed that one gate leads outside and the other to the boss area. They can't stay here forever, they'll have to choose one of the gates. The adventurer asked if they should go through the same gate. Jonas said it was reasonable. In case of the boss, they would have a better chance of surviving if they all fought together. But if this is the exit, then the problem will be solved. However, if they split up, then at least someone will be able to survive and report to the guild where the gate leads. Then you need to split into 2 groups so that someone definitely survives and tells the guild where the boss is. But then the forces will be halved, and the chance of defeating the boss will be lower. So the people decided to ask the man what they would decide. Everyone present looked expectantly at Jonas, who said that they would split up after all. The main thing is that someone survives and tells the guild which gates lead where. It would be best if everyone gathered together, but there is no time. They decided to leave one in case someone late came here. They would leave enough food and promise to come back here again. They turned their attention to Fenia, who calmly stated that she would also stay. Jonas told her that Yurin was probably already gone. He thought that a first-level adventurer couldn't have come here alone. But the girl was completely calm. She remained standing in her place while the others split into groups and headed into the aisles. They gradually entered, and the emotions on their faces changed. The odds were 50-50, and it looked like he had chosen the wrong path. In front of them stood a large goblin boss with a sharp crown on his head. It was a king who had a huge body and swung a massive club with his mighty arm. Jonas wondered if he was unlucky, and he was much stronger than he expected. It was scary. He was level 978. He was stronger than any monster he had fought so far. This was not his plan at all. There had been no monsters that strong up until now, so he relaxed. But if you think about it, the number of floors to the meeting point was different for each adventurer. He would be able to reach the meeting point on the 5th floor, but what about those who had to go all the way to the 10th floor? It was his mistake. He judged the difficulty only by his feelings. He shouted at the people not to give up. If they act together, they will definitely win. There are 8 of them in total. If they join forces, they have a chance to win. After that, he swung his sword and shouted for the attack to advance. He would try to attract the enemy's attention to create an opening for his comrades to attack. He thought it was hard to hold the boss's blow. Sparks flew from the clash of the 2 weapons. The boss swung his giant club, which the man tried to dodge but missed. The blow sent him flying into the nearby wall, losing his sword. The monster shouted menacingly at him. Jonas was amazed by this. Hadn't he been giving it his all before? The monster swung its weapon again, and the man realized that this was bad, because he had lost his sword. He suddenly saw two adventurers in front of him, who blocked this attack. Bob said he shouldn't forget about them, and John added that he wouldn't let him go to the other world before him. Jonas responded contentedly that if they were protecting him, then he still had room to grow. He ordered the mages and archers to keep their distance and support them. Everyone understood his orders and prepared to attack the enemy. They were all determined to win. Using their shields, they repelled the boss's attacks, and with sharp weapons, they struck all accessible parts of the body, causing the boss to finally stagger. Jonas tensed every muscle in his body, preparing to deliver a powerful blow to defeat the boss. His veins bulged with tension. He finally dealt a decisive blow to the boss, which he tried to cut into several pieces. The other adventurers also attacked him. Seeing the monster fall, they shouted that they had succeeded. They were incredibly happy about it. They thought that they had defeated the boss and that the dungeon was now completely cleared. They praised the man. But suddenly a scratch appeared on Jonas's cheek. Bob fell from this blow. One by one, Jonas's comrades began to fall to the ground from the stones that hit them. The man saw that the boss did not receive a single scratch from the decisive blow. He did not understand why everyone around him was falling. He saw that the boss was using projectiles. He ordered everyone to run away, otherwise they would become targets. But more and more blows reached the squad members. It was terrifying, because every blow hit its target. Although they were exhausted, it was astonishing that such an experienced adventurer like him and such elite fighters would give in to ordinary missiles. Jonas shouted that he would not let him do that. He then swung his giant sword in fury, preparing to strike the monster. However, the boss counterattacked him back, causing him to fly into the wall, hitting it with such force that debris flew in all directions. He thought that he must not lose consciousness. As long as he was conscious, he could fight. He had to hold on. He saw the boss standing in front of him laughing loudly. Suddenly, he heard a voice asking if it had started. He looked at the protagonist in shock and didn't understand why he was here. He stood there with a smug smile and declared that he had come to fight the boss. The girl next to him smiled calmly. She asked him how he felt. He said that he seemed lucky. The girl added that everyone was defeated, but still alive. Taking the potions out of his inventory, he handed them to the girl and told her to distribute them to everyone. She immediately obeyed him, and the guy moved towards the monster. He looked at the grinning boss with a satisfied smile, saying that this was a serious opponent who would be interesting to fight him. He offered him to play with him. By spending points, he obtained the parry skill and raised it to level 4. He met the boss's attack with this skill. Without a doubt, however, his sword was shattered into small pieces. Parry is a skill that allows you to deflect physical attacks with a sword. It requires high proficiency to perform successfully. Warrior classes can learn it cheaper than him. He began to run away from the monster on foot. A level 4 parry can deflect the Goblin King's attacks, unless the timing is wrong, but he couldn't hold on to the knife. The boss ran after him, laughing loudly. The protagonist said that, on the one hand, a knife is the most fragile weapon, so nothing can be done, but it is still unpleasant, because now he can't comply with the knife restrictions, so he has to use the steel dragon dagger. At that moment, the boss swung at him again, but the guy parried all of his attacks. He made his dagger from the scales of a steel-scaled dragon just in case, but it came in handy right away. The boss started attacking again, swinging furiously, but the guy decided to use the dagger in a different way, throwing it towards the monster. The series of powerful Goblin Kings is familiar to everyone from the game. The main character began to use various weapons, using arrows, then flash grenades. Each attack reached its target, hitting the bridge. The guy quickly approached him. He used item change, taking the steel dragon dagger. He swung it, hitting the goblin right in the eyes. The goblin screamed loudly, but the guy didn't stop, preparing to throw a grenade. The grenade's powerful impact hit the monster's head, causing its body to tremble before it fell to the ground. The satisfied guy standing in the middle of the smoke was smiling widely. Jonas, sitting near the wall, was watching what was happening with wide open eyes, not understanding anything.